I call the session of the Public Service Commission to order. Madam Secretary, are there any changes to the final agenda?
There are no changes to the final agenda.
Thank you. Before moving to the agenda, I'll conduct a roll call of commissioners. When I call your name, please confirm that you are present. Commissioner Berman.
Here.
Commissioner Alisi.
Here.
Commissioner Edwards.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Commissioner Howard.
Here.
Commissioner Valesky.
Here.
Commissioner Majori.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. We'll now move to the regular agenda. And our first item, item 201, case 22-M-0149, related to the implementation and compliance with the requirements of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, also known as the CLCPA. Today it will be presented by Ms. Jessica Waldorf, our Chief of Staff, with Marco Padula, Peggy Neville, Maud Emerson, and Lindsay Overton available for questions. Ms. Waldorf, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. My name is Jessica Waldorf, and I am the Chief of Staff and Director of Policy Implementation at the Department. I'm here today to present the order on the implementation of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or as I will refer to it throughout, CLCPA. The CLCPA is the most ambitious climate policy legislation enacted in the country and will significantly transform every sector of the state's economy. It contains a number of statutory targets and requirements, including an 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The CLCPA also sets standards to ensure that the benefits of clean energy investments directly serve disadvantaged communities in the state that have been disproportionately impacted by climate change, including the requirement that at least 35% with a goal of 40% of the benefits of these investments are directed to disadvantaged communities. The Commission will continue to play a critical role in advancing the CLCPA's efforts and has quickly taken action within its jurisdiction to help put the state on a path to meeting the CLCPA's aggressive targets. Specifically, the Commission has implemented a variety of clean energy initiatives, both pre- and post-CLCPA enactment, including large-scale and distributed clean energy project development, energy efficiency, building electrification, zero-emission transportation, programs to reduce natural gas usage, and instituted a coordinated planning process to evaluate local transmission and distribution system needs to support the state's full transition to a zero-emissions electric grid. Given the scope of the CLCPA and the extensive work necessary to achieve its mandates, continuous monitoring of progress will be crucial to ensure that the state remains on track to achieve these objectives. There are also existing policies that will need to be reviewed and new policies that will need to be developed to further the enablement of the CLCPA. The order before you institutes this proceeding to both track and assess progress made towards the CLCPA mandates and will provide policy guidance and serve as a forum for policy development as necessary for the additional actions needed to help achieve the objectives of this law. The order reinforces the Commission's statutory responsibilities in implementing the CLCPA, as well as its core mission to ensure that utilities can provide safe and adequate service at just and reasonable rates, and the reliability and resiliency of the electric and gas systems. It establishes necessary guidance and requirements for staff and utilities in future rate cases to evaluate compliance with the law's emissions limits and targets. It includes a notice for comment on one policy issue and establishes an informational presentation by staff to the Commission on compliance with the requirements of the CLCPA pertaining to the Commission and the Department. The order does not conflict with the work that is ongoing at the Climate Action Council or with the work that is taking place in the gas planning proceeding or any other related proceeding. It does not include any new funding decisions, nor does it ask the Commission to make any new decisions on policy issues. The Commission and the state have already made significant progress towards achieving the mandates of the CLCPA related to the decarbonization of the electric system. When taking our existing renewable energy generation and combining it with the projects that are awarded, existing, and contracted, 63% of the state's generation will come from renewable sources, well on the way to achieving 70% renewable energy by 2030. Several recent rate cases included emissions inventory requirements, often within a broader study, and required in advance of the utility's next rate filing. However, the requirements have varied both in terms of the required content and frequency of submission. There have also been additional actions at the state level that provide further clarity to utilities and industries on how to assess the emissions within their sector of the economy including the release of statewide greenhouse gas emissions limits and the release of the first annual statewide greenhouse gas report by the Department of Environmental Conservation. The order establishes an annual greenhouse gas emissions inventory reporting process with the major electric and gas investor-owned utilities and clear and consistent statewide guidelines for greenhouse gas emissions reporting requirements. Utilities will work with staff in developing a proposal for this annual greenhouse gas emissions inventory report, including the requirements and methodology used to calculate emissions, and file a draft version of the proposal for public comment by December 1st of 2022. Establishing this annual greenhouse gas emissions inventory reporting process and distinguishing it from the CLCPA studies required in past rate cases will allow the Commission to evaluate the impact of utilities planning measures and operational changes each year. Additionally, requiring all utilities to submit on the same frequency will allow for a cumulative assessment of the utilities' statewide greenhouse gas emissions. The order also notes that utilities are expected to undertake the same analysis to assess the greenhouse gas emissions impacts of the investments, capital expenditures, programs, and initiatives in their future rate filings, consistent with requirements included in recent rate cases. The order highlights the importance of ensuring the benefits of the state's clean energy investments are realized in disadvantaged communities, and specific actions the Commission has already taken to achieve that. Staff is currently working with utilities and other state agencies to baseline current clean energy and energy efficiency programs to determine if they comply with the CLCPA's requirement, and will continue to evaluate our existing programs and report on those that require modification. Overall compliance with this mandate will be tracked and reported on an annual basis within this proceeding. The order explains the reasoning behind the Commission's prior determination that the megawatt-hour load ratio share methodology is appropriate for allocating the cost of large-scale clean energy projects that directly serve the CLCPA's goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions statewide. However, it also notes the concerns that have been raised by commissioners and stakeholders about the increased cost of CLCPA investments and the impacts that this will have on ratepayers and maintaining energy affordability. The order before you directs staff to include detailed cost impacts of any new CLCPA investment projects and/or programs when presenting such proposals to the Commission for consideration, as well as continue to undertake the benefit cost analysis required under the Benefit Cost Analysis Framework Order. It also directs staff to include a discussion of CLCPA-based cost impacts and benefits in its annual informational presentation so that the Commission and the public have this information to understand the impact of these capital investments on ratepayers. The Commission has two policies that pertain to utility ownership of electric generation assets. The Commission's vertical market power policy establishes a presumption that utility ownership of large-scale generation has anti-competitive consequences and established 3 conditions for a utility to rebut this presumption. In its Reforming the Energy Vision Track 1 order, the Commission determined utility ownership of distributed energy resources will be the exception rather than the rule, and established 4 circumstances under which utility ownership of distributed energy resources would be allowed. The same concerns that existed at the time of those policies being developed are still relevant today. However, there are stakeholders asking for a reevaluation of those policies, including submission in recent rate cases or other petition filings by utilities, asking for the Commission to reconsider them in light of the evolving policy changes at the state level, including achieving the aggressive clean energy goals established in the CLCPA. The order explains that the issue of utility ownership of renewable generation assets must be considered in the context of what can best accelerate the market and be consistent with the public interest. To help inform the Commission's assessment as to whether revisions to its prior policies are necessary, the order directs the Secretary to issue a notice seeking public comment regarding utility ownership of both distributed energy resources and large-scale renewables contemporaneously with the issuance of this order. Similar to the requirements the Commission has included in recent rate cases on emissions inventories, the Commission has required utilities to file studies assessing the impacts of transitioning away from the use of natural gas. This order recognizes the value of having one coordinated statewide study and directs the utilities to work with staff to develop a proposal for a greenhouse gas emissions reductions pathway study, or study proposal, that analyzes the scale, timing, costs, risk, uncertainties, and customer bill impacts of achieving significant and quantifiable reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from the use of gas delivered by utilities. The order directs the utilities to file the study proposal for public comment by March 31st of 2023 and engage stakeholders prior to its submission. The order also notes that it expects staff to continue work in the gas planning proceeding and in utility-specific rate cases, as appropriate, to address both near and long-term measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the gas delivery system, including many of the measures adopted in recent rate cases. The staff gas system planning proposal in the gas planning proceeding recommends the Commission direct New York's gas utilities to file long-term plans that consider the greenhouse gas emissions impacts of new gas infrastructure and the state's reduction goals. The study proposal in this order will help inform these long-term plans. Staff will align its work under the gas planning proceeding and in the development of the study proposal and consider any recommendations for the decarbonization of the gas delivery system that may be included in the Climate Action Council scoping plan once finalized. The order notes that the Commission will continue to review proposals for the use of alternative fuels, such as locally produced biomethane or green hydrogen, and evaluate the costs, reliability benefits, and the environmental impacts and benefits associated with the use of these fuels. The order highlights all the significant investments the Commission has made in energy efficiency and building electrification, including the Clean Energy Fund and New Efficiency New York, that are projected to achieve over 2/3 of the statewide energy efficiency goal. It notes that NYSERDA and the utilities should continue to explore and refine approaches to make the most efficient use of ratepayer funds, as well as eliminate confusion in the marketplace and provide streamlined access to consumers. The order also highlights New York's efforts in electric and gas demand response programs, and that while the electric demand response market has seen steady growth, the state's suite of gas demand response programs is limited. It notes the Commission anticipates implementing a statewide proceeding in the future to investigate the potential expansion of gas demand response programs statewide and to determine if such programs can be operated on a cost-effective basis as a normal part of the utility business going forward. The order highlights the many actions the Commission has taken towards the state's zero-emissions vehicle goals, including time-of-use rates, per-plug incentives to mitigate the cost of installing publicly accessible, direct current fast-charging facilities, and several EV demonstration and pilot projects. It also highlights the efforts under the EV Make Ready program and that it directed the electric investor-owned utilities to file managed charging program proposals that it expects staff to complete its review of in the near future. The order also highlights the work staff and the Commission will do to complete the new statutory responsibility to establish a commercial EV tariff and the importance of ongoing monitoring to enable increased deployment of zero-emissions vehicles. The order outlines the history of the Commission's actions on non-wires alternatives projects, and that while electric non-wires alternatives projects have been steadily advancing, gas non-pipe alternatives projects have been slower to mature as they are meaningfully more complicated. It notes the Commission anticipates addressing these and other issues related to the advancement of non-pipe alternative projects within the gas planning proceeding. The order outlines the Commission's actions to date to support large-scale renewable energy resources and advanced green technologies, including solar, transmission infrastructure, energy storage, and on- and offshore wind. Through the Reforming the Energy Vision, New York Sun, Clean Energy Fund, and Clean Energy Standard initiatives. The order notes that the Commission and Department will continue to evaluate our existing programs to determine whether more resources are needed to both meet anticipated increased electric demand, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and to maintain system reliability. As noted earlier, the order directs staff on an annual basis to present to the Commission an informational item detailing the Commission's actions and the Department's activities associated with the overall compliance with the CLCPA mandates. The presentation will include, but not be limited to, the emissions associated with electric and gas usage in the state, progress on achieving the targets mandated within the Renewable Energy Program, the costs and benefits to ratepayers of CLCPA investments over the prior year, and a review to the extent that the investments made to comply with the Commission's CLCPA-related programs over the prior year benefited disadvantaged communities. In closing, the magnitude of the change needed to achieve the goals of the CLCPA is significant and must consider climate justice, just transition, reliability, and resiliency of the energy systems, and cost mitigation to preserve energy affordability. The order outlines all the ways the Commission is already demonstrating leadership in achieving the goals of the CLCPA and establishes clear guidance and procedures to monitor progress moving forward, as well as evaluate the performance of our utilities. This concludes my presentation. I would like to thank the many staff members that contributed to the development of this order, which, in addition to establishing new procedures here at the department, also serves as a summary of all of the incredible work the Commission and staff have done to date in achieving the state's climate and clean energy goals. We are now available to answer any questions the Commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Waldorf. And as I echo your thanks to staff on putting this together. This is a truly great accomplishment in advancing us towards our requirements in meeting the CLCPA. Now, throughout your presentation, you pointed out the variety of emissions reduction targets and renewable energy targets required by the CLCPA, and also the Commission-specific directives that are embedded in the CLCPA, for which we are being called to support the transition towards a zero-emission grid and decarbonizing the broader economy. To date, we've largely done that through rate cases and a variety of orders, and we can cite several of the actions in the past that support this overarching goal. You mentioned electrifying buildings, electrification of transportation, and other factors. Also large-scale renewable distributed energy resources. And though we've seen great progress through all these actions, as you pointed out, much more needs to be done. Particularly as we move forward with meeting the requirements to support disadvantaged communities, and doing so at a minimum to the degree outlined in the CLCPA. So this order helps us track and assess the future efforts, monitor progress of the directives specific to the Commission, and ensure that the actions we take continue to support, rather than erode, our long-standing mandate to provide safe, reliable, and affordable electric service. The Commission's commitment to these mandates is unwavering, and any additional supporting actions and policy guidance will be evaluated with those mandates in mind. This proceeding will better serve the Commission and the public and allow for greater transparency while serving as a venue through which any future actions can be taken. In addition to serving as a summary for past and future work, it also takes into consideration many of the concerns raised by this Commission and its commissioners, particularly those regarding the cost of the CLCPA investments and their impacts on affordability. It will also help facilitate discussions towards the development of an all-of-state plan for financing future investments, which I'm looking forward to. Much of the CLCPA to date has been implemented through ratepayer funds, and alternatives will be helpful in maintaining affordability while ensuring we maintain our trajectory towards 2030, 2040, and beyond. So through this action, we reaffirm the Commission's longstanding commitment to achieving the state's goals while balancing reliability and affordability. And I want to thank you and staff again for putting this together. And with that, go to you, Commissioner Berman, for comments.
Thank you. I appreciate all the work that has clearly gone into this, not just for this item, but in all of the work that's gone in preparation for the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act since it's gone into effect, in all of the different implementation challenges, and then the work that's under our jurisdiction directly and indirectly, and working with the different agencies, the different working groups, and the Climate Action Council. I think that for me, there are a couple of different things that I'd like to touch upon and reflect upon. This is our first time as a commission as a whole in actually discussing it as a item and hearing from each other on this forward path and putting it in one item. I am concerned about then doing that somewhat in a vacuum and then voting on it and moving forward today. For me, I do think that we don't have the luxury that the Climate Action Council has in a lot of the ongoing dialogue on record and off record as a whole, where they're able to talk as a full body and then come together and put a document together. That, for me, means that this document as a draft doesn't necessarily represent my voice or the voice of the full commission. Doesn't mean that it's not touching upon some of that, but that's somewhat that I think it's important for us to keep that in mind as we go forward. However, I do think that it is a really good attempt and a really good mechanism, and staff under the direction of the chair have worked hard to try to put in this document aspects of our voices, especially as it comes to certain things like reliability and costs in there, and I appreciate that. What this order does do, as you point out, is reinforcing our statutory obligations. For whatever reason, there has been a lot of concern on whether we support or will follow the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. I think that's probably a fair questioning, but I think it's only fair in terms of how to implement it, not necessarily do we believe that we have to follow our statutory obligations. Without a doubt, the Commission, I believe, as a whole, would agree we would follow all of our statutory responsibilities and not just one singular piece of it, but taken as a whole. So for me, it's the reinforcement of our statutory responsibilities is important. Embedded within the CLCPA is not just one piece of it, though. It's in there. It expressly talks about reliability. But even if it did not, we have other aspects of our public service law and our own mission that we would have to incorporate, that we cannot just look at it in a vacuum. In the implementation aspect of the CLCPA, it's a work in progress. And so for us, we need to be working through that, planning, being cognizant of that. And so it's important for us to have these conversations and be focused on that. I am concerned, though, that in some ways, and the draft scoping plan does seem to try to narrow some of it in a way that may not leave enough flexibility for what is under our jurisdiction, or tries to too much direct things that may more appropriately need to be carefully analyzed under our jurisdiction by the technical experts over at DPS in collaboration with the technical experts like the Reliability Council, like the ISO, and like other technical experts that we may need to engage with. So that's something that I'm reflective of. What I am concerned with when I see this is that the draft order does seem to rely too heavily on what the draft scoping plan says, and then in alignment to what will come from the final plan, and kind of directing staff to ensure that we or the staff is aligned with the final plan. we as a commission don't know what that final plan will be, and we should not presume that, and that process needs to play out. But more importantly, that process does not just end with the final plan. After that final plan, which has recommendations, it then goes to the State Energy Planning Board, which has its own statutory obligations, and those recommendations then get vetted and SAPA'd, and there's a whole other process. And then, therefore, under the Public Service Law and the State Energy Law, there are other whole other realms of processes and substantive mechanisms. So for me, I don't necessarily want to be locked in to some of our substantive jurisdictional responsibilities that are only being looked at in the vacuum of the Climate Action Council, when I believe strongly that some of the very essence of what we do, our bread and butter, need to be looked at from a technical perspective by us now and by us throughout the whole process in a way that may not be as carefully evaluated, even if it's passionately evaluated in the Climate Action Council. That is a process we are removed from it, even though we do have the chair who's a part of it. It is not a direct linkage, and he sits in it in a very different role, and it is not a direct linkage to us. And so we need to be careful about our own roles and responsibilities, as he is cognizant of it, and we are cognizant of those roles. So for me, I just want to make sure that we are very focused when we're looking at it, of being cognizant of that. To the extent that we are also, as we have on this session, other items that are sort of intricately connected, 101 and 102, that deal with gas planning and the gas moratorium issues, and then some consent items that also bleed into it. It was a little difficult for me to keep track of how they all either fit or don't fit together. So some of the things that I might say here, I will save for brevity, for 101 and 102. But I did want to touch upon the gas planning transition as it relates to the draft scoping plan. There is a whole section that is devoted in the draft scoping plan to the gas transition. I was a little concerned, and I underscore that only because the way I envision sort of our focus is that we need to be open to looking at all options and seeing what is viable, and making sure that we are not leaving off the table any potential viable thing. When you look at the gas transition section in the draft scoping plan, it starts out that says that it is looking at entailing a downsizing of the fossil gas system. And then it continues throughout that. Two things I'm struck by. One, the use of the word fossil gas. Now, I know that there was a whole debate in the Climate Action Council on that usage. I'm not going to rehash that. I do think that was a worthwhile debate. Unfortunately, as I see it, I do think that from a technical perspective, it's important that we be very careful that we are focused on the usage from a technical perspective. As it applies to us technically, it matters. Technically, when we are looking at it, we have to be careful. It relates to regulations. It relates to laws. not just at the state level, but at the federal level. It relates to what it means when we're looking at our regulations on a safety matter with PHMSA and our regulations there and who it may or may not apply to. And so we can't just decide how we are going to rename things, because that means that we may need to try to change everything in a way that we're going to confuse and possibly cause disruption that's unintended and has significant consequences. And in terms of this, here for me, that causes me concern, because it also means that we're focusing on it in a way that gets away from the technical, already understood, already embedded in the law at the federal level and at the state level and across the nation. And that's of concern to me. That's a debate for another day in terms of whether or not that to be changed. But for me, as we go forward, we have to be careful in terms of the technical nature of those things. The other aspect of it is the downsizing. That's a presumption that we are going to downsize. For me, I believed when we were looking at this that we would be looking at what that means in terms of the transition of the gas system and the opportunities that we may need to be looking at, whether that is reducing emissions with certain technologies that may help us in underserved areas in upstate that may be able to benefit from that, looking at renewable natural gas, looking at hydrogen, all of those things that have a need for us to lean into and to do analysis from, and to help us in our important role that we have. When we talk about it from the end of downsizing, we miss a core component of already what we've been hearing from in terms of the Manufacturers Association, that we've had parties submitting in proceedings saying they need gas or they're going to have a problem, multiple interveners in many of our proceedings, consumer power advocates. And so for me, from an economic regulatory perspective, not only are we going to have missed our a core component of the voices of stakeholders, but we're also not understanding what potentially that means from a reliability perspective. So I would like to start out not necessarily saying downsizing, but what does this mean with the role of natural gas in the transition? And that's why for us, that looking at it when we embed in our draft order, the draft scoping plan, it takes me a little bit with a concern because it's not making it broader for me, which is that the draft scoping plan is too narrow in terms of what we have to accomplish and look at. So for me, I'd like just to make sure that we're having more of a focus that doesn't just follow too narrowly and cause us to miss our statutory responsibilities that are related to that. Now getting to the next thing, which is the costs. I am glad that it is focused in here on the costs. I am glad that there is focus on saying that it's in response to not only stakeholders, but also commissioners. Each of us come at it a little differently. What the costs are, what the benefits are. I think we need to have a fuller conversation on what that means and actually have some real numbers now, and also working together so that we are talking the same. So there is in here focus on rates, ratepayers, CLCPA-related costs. We all may be speaking differently. Rate impacts may be different than bill impacts. CLCPA-related costs, you may be thinking of it as only related to the utility costs. I may be thinking of it related to the broader costs that are related to having to get rid of your gas furnace and what that may mean. All of the different other side costs, workforce development that may be having to be done. So I just want us, and then the benefits that may go with that. I just want us to be very careful and forward-thinking now so that it is not that we get so far along. And it seems to me that this has been something that we've been talking about for so long that it's hard for me to just see it saying, yes, we hear you and we're going to do this, where I feel like we need to actually have publicly numbers and really getting much more granular in that. And I thank you for that. The one thing I like is I think this is supposed to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, a clearinghouse of kind of tracking all that's happening on the CLCPA related proceedings. My impression though is that it will be hard for folks to look at this and say that this is a good clearinghouse unless we have an ability to do more than just this sort of draft order. So when I look at it, initially, the draft order, it has a lot of different things in there. It talks about, the New York Sun and Clean Energy Standard, and there's a whole host of proceedings. Many of them, you may know, I voted no on or concurred. And I don't want the impression to be that all of us are now confirming our support for all of it, because I think that would be the wrong impression, especially as it has future funding that may be attached to it or future decisions that we may have to do. So I think that it would be important for there to be some kind of tracker that is more of for a layman to be able to look at and say, what were all the proceedings? What's the case number? What's the date? What's the summary? Again, I'm not looking for people to have to, spend a lot of time on it, but I do think it's important that there's some ability to easily track it. I'm sure there's some external website that has a lot of it anyway. But if we are going to be looking at this as the clearinghouse, we should at least be thinking about what that means. What I'm not comfortable with embedded in here is the discussion of this as a forum for policy development. I understand it. The forum for policy development is our discussions here, is our discussions as a commission as a whole, is our discussions on what is appropriate for us to tackle next. Opening a proceeding and discussing that, seeing what's next on the horizon, what we may want to do in order of priority. But part of it is we've already sort of gotten out of the gate the next thing, which I not necessarily sure is the first thing of priority, which is utility ownership. It is on some people's top priority. But there are also other pending proceedings. EDF just brought a proceeding. IPNY and other environmentalists brought a joint proceeding. There's a whole host of proceedings that are still pending. It would be helpful on that tracker to know what is still there, but also I think what's helpful is for us to have closure on those proceedings, even if it's to say, we are not doing anything on those proceedings. We may disagree on what we're doing or not doing, but at least there's finality, rather than, as we'll see in later, a resolution many years later, right? So it helps us sort of come to terms with what's out there. So for me, the focus for policy development gets sticky in a generic proceeding, because as we've seen in, I'm blanking on the case number, 15E. Yes. You can't find anything in there, but there's 25 million different proceedings in there, right? 25 different things. So if we're going to have a clearinghouse, we've got to figure out a way, and I know DMM is the most horrible thing to try to figure out. We have to figure out a way to make it easier for people. Because if we are going to engage in a much more comprehensive, real way, if we are going to actually help, because if I'm a commissioner and I give up, I can't. I just feel it's hard for everybody else. So I just have to sort of understand this, because when we, especially again, when we have agendas and it pops 15E, what's the number? 0302. Right. Everybody says, "Oh my God, is that my issue?" Right? So even on that, we have to be more careful and just saying, "Not your issue." Right? In a way that just lets people know. I'm only going to talk a little bit more. There is in here also discussion on the working group, one of the working groups, and that also is of concern to me because it's part of the Climate Action Council. And again, it gets sort of, to me, while that is helpful information, it is sort of stepping into someone else's arena. And that may be information for us in having and understanding, but it is also, a lot of that is still being sort of worked through and processed, and may come in some fashion through other means and mechanisms, and we need to kind of be cognizant of that. And so the draft order, in many aspects, seems to sort of try to put closure on things that I worry that it locks us in too much. Or at the same time, there are aspects of it where it says we will be waiting for the Climate Action Council to deal with. And we see this also in the other items too, with, like, for example, RNG and hydrogen. And I do believe that we have an ability to get under the hood of a lot of those issues on our own, and we should. So I do appreciate the diligence. I appreciate the continuing dialogue. I really think it's important for us as a commission to work with each other as well as staff in a way that helps us be much more thoughtful as a commission as a whole on what we want to see next. And I look forward to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Alisi, any comments?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I have nothing to add. I'll be supporting the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Edwards, do you have anything to say?
Within the order, it speaks to the, on page 17 specifically, about the climate justice working group as it relates to the disadvantaged communities. So does anyone know how they get appointed, the climate justice working group?
Sure.
Do you know?
Yep, Commissioner Edwards, I'm actually going to turn this over to Peggy to respond to that one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioner. Yes, so the Climate Justice Working Group, as you referenced in the draft order, and I believe Jessica addressed, has been active. I believe it was formed back in 2020. We'll have to get back to you on specific details about the process, but what I can tell you is that the statute itself identified the types of representatives that should be on the Climate Justice Working Group, and those were representatives of communities of color, communities of low income, as well as communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. Also representatives from organizations that have a history of advocacy on environmental justice issues. I believe the statute also specifically required that the composition of the working group included 3 representatives from the New York City communities, 3 from upstate urban communities, as well as 3 from rural communities. So there was some guidance provided within the statute. I don't believe it specifically spoke to the process, and so that's what I'd like to follow up on with our colleagues at the Department of Environmental Conservation on other details there, but that's what I can share with you as far as the composition as it stands today.
Okay, thank you, because that is a very powerful group, as in the Climate Justice Action Council. All of the working groups are there. And, it specifically says that they are working on investment in direct resources, housing, workforce development, pollution reduction, low-income energy assistance, transportation, and economic development. My concern is that when I look at the disadvantaged communities, it does represent all regions, but the working group does not. So the working group, you outlined it correctly, has the 3 members from New York City, 3 from the rural communities, and 3 from urban communities in upstate New York. It does not include suburban communities. It does not include anyone from Long Island. So I'm particularly interested in how that came about, what the statute is, what their responsibilities are, and then taking a look at all of those different working groups, because the other one that piqued my interest was the Just Transition Working Group as well. Because I'd like to know more about, as a follow-up, our relationship between the working groups, the council, and this particular order. And if we could not only do that, but more about the tracking and representation tracking more than annual. Because I just think that, the jurisdiction for the CLCPA is statewide, but it just doesn't look like that the representatives that are on the working groups are represented statewide. So if you could get back to me, I would appreciate that.
Yes, certainly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Evans. Commissioner Howard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be supporting this for one reason, one overarching reason. I am hopeful, and I'm counting on you, Mr. Chairman, and staff, that we do an actual accounting of what things cost people. And in a corollary to that is what these new costs will mean to our broader economic competitiveness in each region of New York State, which is very diverse and very, very, very different. And to that, I do applaud you for moving ahead with this. However, I just want to go on the record. There is one aspect of this order that I do not agree with, is the locking in of the volumetric load share ratio for paying for renewables and associated transmission projects. I don't believe that is it may be somewhat of a divergence from my previous positions, but I don't currently believe it is a fair and adequate way to do things. I understand it's an easy accounting mechanism, but I don't think it really gets to the point. And at this point, I want to say, because it's been discussed particularly in other things and in the press, this issue of, and it came up last month, this issue of the two grids. That we have an upstate grid, which is largely zero emission, way over 90%, and we have a downstate grid that is the same proportion of fossil-based grid. At no time during the debate on the CLCPA or subsequently we made it clear to all New Yorkers that the state of New York wants the zero emission people to help subsidize at a greater level the high emission people. That just has not been discussed. My belief is, had it been transparent at the front end, we may be in a very different spot than we are today. But again, I think that is very cognizant of this, is that, and particularly the continued vulnerability of the upstate economy. Our entire state's economy is shaky in its foundations, but I believe the upstate economy is shakier. It's one thing that's also occurred to me, and particularly it is in relate to the powers of this commission. And I'm going to use the phrase, the taxing powers of this commission. Because the legislature, either through its silence or total lack of action, has given this commission nearly the exclusive responsibility to reach into New Yorkers' pockets to pay for the CLCPA mandates. Nobody else. There is no general revenue associated with this, and that we are doing it every day, and we're going to do it sometimes later in this session. Again, and I will almost assure you, the same authors and proponents of the CLCPA in the legislature, when they see the actual bill impacts and rate impacts of the measures that we will be forced to do in the absence of their action, we will be highly criticized. We will be highly criticized. Because currently, we're the only guys in town, literally, who will pay for these actions. And again, to the extent that this proceeding provides the real transparent cost to New Yorkers, independent of a benefit analysis, which I believe is critical, but we got to know the cost cold. And Mr. Chairman, as I said, when I was a member of the Climate Action Council, and I've said through here, the total obfuscation of the cost issue through the CLCPA from when it was passed, the formation of the Climate Action Council, the working groups, and then the subsequent scoping plan falls far, far short. I believe it's totally obfuscated the actual cost to New Yorkers. And I think if New Yorkers knew that, they would have a different opinion on the outcomes. I also have to note that the legislature is currently holding a hearing as we speak on the issue of building electrification. And I have serious doubts if the actual costs and who ought to pay for those programs will be discussed this morning. Again, if the legislature does not want to pay for it, I hope my colleagues on this commission understand that responsibility falls to us exclusively, to the tune of hundreds, not a couple, hundreds of billions of dollars. And it is an awesome responsibility, and that we got through statute and by default. But with that, I do appreciate the staff's work on this. By the way, the staff's work on this, we're at the toe of this curve. The work gets much more complicated, and to fulfill the mandates that I believe that the chairman, and I certainly concur with this, the amount of clarity that we need to provide to cut through this fog that is created by, I believe, a totally unworkable program that the 22-member Climate Action Council and its subsequent subcommittees it is almost a Rube Goldberg way to make public policy. And again, it is very easy not to be able to tell New Yorkers what's really going on. And to that extent, I concur with Commissioner Berman that we have a lot of proceedings that overlap and intertwine, and that maybe through this thing, that maybe our own agenda and proceedings, we somewhere how to combine, streamline, and I'll rely on our august councils to figure out what can we do to make that easier, more transparent, and actually easier for stakeholders to participate in each one of our proceedings. So to that end, I will be supporting this. I do look forward to this, but again, the more honest we are, the happier I'm going to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Chair Christian. I'm going to actually pick up where Commissioner Howard left off, and perhaps it's to our august general counsel in the room, but Commissioner Berman referred to it as well. I'm going to support this order from certainly a clearinghouse of CLCPA items is really, really important. But in terms of the day-to-day or month-to-month business that we conduct, will we have, I'll use today's agenda. So on the consent agenda, I guess I'll address this to you, Mr. Rosenthal. So on the consent agenda, we have at least two items coming up. I think they're numbers 375 and 380 that have to do with cost allocation. Will we have a way in future sessions, assuming this order is adopted, will there be a mechanical way, let's say in June session, when various proceedings come before us in this new, that have to do with the CLCPA, in light of this order, draft order, assuming it is approved, that will clearly identify, not only for us as commissioners, but to Commissioner Berman's point, to the general public and her usage of 15E03002, to be precise, but to make it clear to all of us that these are items that we will be considering that have a CLCPA impact and somehow fit under the construct of this order.
So that's the goal. I mean, the purpose of this order was to create a clearinghouse. And just the order itself, just so you know, the CLCPA has a provision, and it's 66-P3, and it requires the commission by July 1st, 2024, and every 2 years thereafter, to do a bunch of things, one of which is to identify progress in meeting the CLCPA targets. I think one addresses the issue that you're all raising right now, but it also requires that the Commission has to provide an understanding of the annual funding and commitments of commitments and expenditures made under the CLCPA. So we're trying to get ahead of that, is what this order does.
I think that's really important, and in any way, in every way that we can make it very clear going forward, and perhaps I should address the suggestion directly to you, Chair Christian. So even the technicality of the agendas that come before us, through some sort of notation, that this item in some way, shape, or form has something to do with what we're about to do today. I think that would be really, really important. Again, not only for us, but for the general public as well. There are certainly many components to this. The vast majority I do support. Some I have concerns with, but I do want to identify just two if I could. The first one has to do, and I'm going to just take a few seconds to read into the record from the order itself, because I think it's important. The first one speaks to Commissioner Howard's quote, "What things cost people," is what Commissioner Howard said earlier. So I'm just going to read again from page 20, at least the version that I'm reading from is page 20 of the order, which says, "The Commission has noted in many of its recent decisions," and I would just add, certainly only a month ago, specifically during Tier 4, I and many commissioners raised the issue of cost. Commission has noted in many of its recent decisions that there is a concern about the impact the increased costs of CLCPA investments will have on ratepayers and maintaining energy affordability. Since investments required to implement the CLCPA are becoming a significant driver of utility rate increases, it is critical for DPS staff to provide the Commission and the public with specific cost-based information to understand the impact of these capital investments on ratepayers as part of our core obligation to ensure just and reasonable rates. The Commission expects staff to continue to include detailed cost impacts of any new CLCPA investment projects and programs when presenting such proposal to the Commission for consideration," and it goes on from there. That's really, really important. I just want to underscore that for the record. One of the other items that I want to just highlight, and to ensure that it doesn't get lost, the notation of alternative fuels. We're recognizing, the Commission, that there may be a need to use alternative and low-carbon fuels, such as locally produced biomethane, green hydrogen, and others as a tool to reduce the carbon content of gas as the state implements strategies for long-term decarbonization and transition of the gas system. I want to articulate that as a lead into my my final point, which has to do with the Climate Action Council. I, in a former life, had an opportunity to serve as a member of the executive committee of the Climate Action Council when it was just getting off the ground shortly after the law itself took effect. So I have a little bit of background in terms of the complexity of that process that continues to play out. I am a little concerned, and picking up where Commissioner Berman shared earlier, that we are in this order referring to a draft climate action plan. A draft plan that has now seen at least 10 or 11 or 12 public hearings. In fact, even today, I believe there's a public hearing. A public comment period that continues to remain open for a couple of weeks or so, at some point in June, I believe. And then at some point, as we head toward January 1st, 2023, an actual vote on a draft scoping plan. And I should say a draft scoping plan that the last I checked actually had some options for the public to consider. I think 3 different options in particular. So it's fair to say that between now and January 1st, the plan as it exists today is not going to be the plan that is, well, it's not enacted into law because it's not a legislature, but adopted. The phrase, I guess, would be adopted by the statutory deadline of January 1st, 2023. The alternative fuels piece, I use that both because I'm concerned about that and in supportive of that direction that the commissioner is giving, but I also use that as an example where I know that there's a fair amount of controversy in the Climate Action Council process. So I think it's important that this order be flexible enough, and that's where I rely on the great work of all the staff, to be flexible enough to both react to whatever that final Climate Action Council scoping plan will be later this year, but also firm enough so that it continues to maintain the priorities of this commission, which, as we all know, has nothing to do with the Climate Action Council, with the exception of the chair holding dual roles, both here and on the council. So I think that could be a delicate balance that has to be found. Only time will tell, because we don't know what the final plan is going to look like. So that would be my one hesitation, that, we are, to the degree we're relying on assumptions of something that may not be final. I would just share that for the general consideration as we go forward. If you'd like to share any thoughts, that would be great.
I would.
Sure.
I would tell you that staff also shares that same concern. But there is a public dialogue playing out, and we wanted to make it clear that the work that we're seeking to accomplish through this order, we're not seeking to directly conflict with the work of that public body. To the extent that recommendations get incorporated into a final scoping plan and those get adopted into a resulting state energy plan, and there are firm directives that are handed to the commission and the department, we'll certainly take recommendations and incorporate that into whatever our future processes are. However, in this order, one of the things that we're doing is we're starting a process now with our utilities. We know that there is this challenge ahead of us to decarbonize the gas system, and we want to have this joint process to think through what that really means together, to bring in technical experts and really evaluate what that means on a practical basis, and also what the cost impacts and technical feasibility of actually achieving that look like. So there is a reference to the draft scoping plan in the section of the gas section of the draft order, but it was intentionally put in there to call attention to the fact that we're not looking to conflict with any actions at the state level. We recognize them, and to the extent that firm recommendations come out of that process and get incorporated into future plans, we'll incorporate that into ours as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, I'll be supporting this draft order. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Majori, do you have any comments?
I want to thank Ms. Waldorf for her presentation and all the staff that worked on this. I think this is an item that's going to have a very long tail. It's an order that I'm going to refer to in the future as we're evaluating other items. Along those lines, I have some questions and comments that are relevant to this plan, but are, I think, more on point in reference to some of the other items on the agenda today. So I'm going to reserve my specific questions and comments for those items. Other than that, I also want to acknowledge that I was, Chair Christian, I was pleased to hear your comments. I think there was some, you said some relevant things that are hopeful about how the whole of government addresses some of the cost-related issues using this order as a tool. So I think this is a very significant order, and I'm going to be pleased to support it today.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So that said, I'll bring this to a vote. So my vote is in favor of the order. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I'm going to be abstaining at this time. I do think it's a appropriate proceeding to bring forward, but I would like to be reflective and have more conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Elise?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
I'm voting in favor.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Thank you very much. This item is approved, and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you. Okay, now that we've done the musical chairs, we'll move to our second and third items. First of the second item, item 101, case 20-G0131, related to the implementation of gas system planning process. It'll be presented by Brandon Goodrich. Hello, Brandon. With Chris Stolicki. And item 102, as it relates to the natural gas moratorium and management process, which will be presented by Ken Sheehan and Chelsea Lakutara. Eric Ryder and Erin Odell Keller are available for questions. Brandon, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. Can you hear me okay? My name is Brandon Goodrich, and I'm the Managing Attorney for the Rate Section in the Office of General Counsel. I'm joined by Chris Stolicki, Chief of Gas Planning and Reliability in the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water, Ken Sheehan, Special Assistant in the Office of General Counsel, and Chelsea Lakutara, Utility Consumer Program Specialist 3 in the Office of Consumer Services. We are here today to present two items in case 20G0131, the gas planning proceeding. Chris Stolicki and I will begin by presenting item 101, draft order adopting a gas system long-term planning process. Ken Sheehan and Chelsea Lakutara will then present the draft order adopting moratorium management procedures. To provide some background, at the March 2020 session, the Commission issued its order initiating the gas planning proceeding. Among other things, that order directed staff to propose a modernized gas system planning process. The Commission emphasized that the modernized process must be transparent and enable alignment with the state's policies. Additionally, the order initiating proceeding encouraged the use of non-pipe alternatives to potentially reduce or eliminate the need for gas infrastructure and investments. It identified the need to explore methods of demand response and peak reduction, and it recognized the need to avoid or mitigate criteria pollutants. On February 12, 2021, staff submitted a gas system planning process proposal, which I will refer to as the planning proposal. Staff held a stakeholder forum on March 25, 2021, at which stakeholders had the opportunity to ask questions of staff prior to submitting their comments on the planning proposal. Interested entities then had the opportunity to provide written comments on May 3rd, 2021, and reply comments on June 4th, 2021. Finally, virtual public statement hearings were held in May of 2021 as well. In developing the draft order before you today, staff reviewed hundreds of comments and endeavored to incorporate those comments into the planning process as appropriate. Additionally, before turning to the planning process itself, I note that since staff released the planning proposal, the Climate Action Council released its draft scoping plan. As was just discussed, we do note that is just a draft of the scoping plan, and there's further process to follow on that. However, the draft scoping plan states that emission reductions are needed from all sectors of the economy to achieve the goals and requirements of the CLCPA. And while the CLCPA does not impose specific requirements on the state's gas distribution system, rationally, meeting the CLCPA's emissions reductions targets for the entire economy will require emissions reductions from the gas distribution system. Further, the draft scoping plan acknowledges that, quote, during the transition to the decarbonized systems, some investments in traditional infrastructure may still be necessary to maintain reliability and safety for remaining fossil gas customers, but greater scrutiny of such investments is warranted to ensure that utilities do not exacerbate the problem of stranded assets and make it more expensive to fully decarbonize the fossil gas sector. The planning process set forth in the draft order reflects the planning proposal with modifications. Generally, the draft order creates a planning process that ensures the Commission, staff, and stakeholders have the necessary information to consider local gas distribution companies, or LDCs, long-term plans, and any alternative solutions to ensure that New York's residents continue to have safe, adequate, and reliable gas service as the state reduces greenhouse gas emissions and transitions to alternative energy sources. Further, the planning process provides a flexible framework through which the Commission can address the work of the Climate Action Council and other changes to the natural gas system that may result from implementation of the CLCPA. The draft order recommends applying the planning process to the 11 largest LDCs, that is, Con Edison, Orange and Rockland, National Grid's 3 operating companies, Central Hudson, New York State Electric and Gas, Rochester Gas and Electric, National Fuel Gas, St. Lawrence, and Corning. Each LDC would be required to file a full long-term plan approximately every 3 years, and the filings would be staggered with approximately 1 utility filing every 4 to 5 months. NFG would be the first to file in December of this year, and in the years in between an LDC's long-term plan filings, the LDC would file an annual update. The order initiating the gas planning proceeding noted the need for the planning process to be transparent and open to stakeholder participation. Many commenters echoed this goal. The planning process set forth in the draft order provides significant opportunities for stakeholder participation. The planning process requires LDCs to engage with stakeholders through a pre-filing technical conference at which the subject LDC can provide background information on its system and operations. And approximately 30 days after that, the LDC would file its initial long-term plan. From that point on, stakeholders would have the opportunity to request information from the LDC. There would also be multiple stakeholder meetings, which staff would facilitate. Further, stakeholders would have multiple opportunities to provide comments on the LDC's long-term plan. Ultimately, the process would result in the LDC submitting a revised long-term plan. And if stakeholders disagree with all or a portion of that revised plan, stakeholders would have the opportunity to explain their disagreement. The Commission could then consider the LDC's revised long-term plan and any stakeholder disagreement and choose to adopt, reject, or modify, in whole or in part, the long-term plan. The draft order recommends providing for staff to select and hire a consultant independent of the LDC to assist in reviewing the LDC's long-term plan and any stakeholder proposals. Staff would issue a request for proposals and select a consultant based on the weighting of those proposals, including the expertise of the consultant staff, interviews, and costs. While the consultant would work at the direction of staff, the subject LDC would pay the costs of the consultant and be permitted to defer those costs with recovery addressed in a rate proceeding. And Chris Stalicki will now address the substantive requirements for the long-term plans and next steps in the gas planning proceeding.
Thank you, Brandon. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. I will walk through the elements of the long-term plans, additional requirements in the order, and then discuss future phases of the proceeding. For the initial filings, LDCs will be required to incorporate a 20-year forecast of natural gas demand, detailing the sources of any growth, be they from new construction or conversions from other heating fuels such as oil or propane. Tied to the demand forecast will be a supply forecast. Some LDCs currently use peaking assets or delivered services to meet demands. The plans would include a justification supporting the need for and reasonableness of these supply solutions. The LDCs would then be required to develop scenarios that include various supply aspects, including one scenario which features no new infrastructure, but instead meets demand solely with programs such as efficiency and demand response. Additionally, LDCs will be required to identify the disadvantaged communities in their service territories, explain the impacts to disadvantaged communities of any proposed projects, and explain how the LDC will ensure that an appropriate portion of the benefits of any proposed NPAs such as energy efficiency, demand response, and electrification access to disadvantaged communities. The plans will also include an NPA framework, which includes a screening process and consideration of removal of leak-prone pipe and strategic planning. Along with the NPA framework, there would be a comparison of alternatives, which will include a benefit cost analysis, estimated bill impacts, net present value calculations, and emissions impacts. As mentioned in Jessica Waldorf's presentation, natural gas demand response programs must be an important part of LDC supply plans going forward and should be increased to represent a larger part of the supply solution. Jessica also explained how the LDCs will be required to include greenhouse gas emissions inventory related to the generic CLCPA proceeding, and LDC long-term plans and annual updates should include reporting on their individual greenhouse gas emissions and progress on reducing them. In addition to adopting the planning process, the draft order recognizes there is more work to be done to inform decisions regarding the gas transition and requires the following 3 next steps. First, the draft order recommends instituting an avoided cost of gas working group. This group would work within the existing benefit cost framework to define certain elements of cost and benefit that are specific to the natural gas industry. Second, the draft order recommends depreciation studies that estimate the cost of different scenarios for depreciating gas plants should be filed within 180 days. Staff recommends that these studies include a scenario that fully depreciates gas plant by 2050, and also a scenario that includes continued use of some gas plant after 2050 to recognize the role for distribution of low carbon fuels such as biomethane and hydrogen into the future. Third, the draft order recommends an effort focused on the cost of entitlements pursuant to 16 NYC-RR Part 230, also known as the 100-foot rule. The LDCs would be required to report the cost of providing natural gas service lines free of cost for new customers. Based on the information provided, staff would propose modifications to 16 NYC-RR Part 230 that balance economic development interests with the need for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Additionally, the draft order also recognizes that there is a need for future phases of this proceeding to ensure it follows developments related to CLCPA. Topics for future phases include the role of hydrogen and biomethane as alternative lower carbon fuel sources. Long-term planning must consider the ability to serve hard-to-electrify customers and may also mitigate parts of the gas system from becoming stranded assets. Second, rate design that can contribute to demand response should be considered, including the ending of rates that encourage the use of more natural gas and the potential of developing seasonal rates. Finally, the role of electrification for space and water heating loads for residential and commercial customers should be a consideration in the natural gas transition. I would like to now turn it over to Ken and Chelsea, who will present item 102.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. This is matter 102 of that same case. Specifically, it is the draft order adopting moratorium management procedures. This is a subset of the matter just presented by our colleagues and flows from the original order instituting proceeding on the natural gas issue. Specifically, this order covers issue 5, standards governing moratorium. These issues have been raised to the Commission through a number of moratoria declared by natural gas companies in the state. And this proceeding and proposed order reflects the desire by the Commission to have future moratoria, if they occur, operate in a fair, transparent, and equitable manner. Specifically, the order instituting proceeding set forth 4 issues that need to be addressed: the declaration of a moratorium, treatment of customers and applicants, communication standards, and the practices, prioritization, and lifting of a moratorium. In response to the order, the joint local distribution companies provided a filing that include a section on moratorium procedures. The JLDCs consist of Con Edison, Kedley, Niagara Mohawk, NYSEG, Rochester Gas and Electric, National Fuel Gas, and Orange and Rockland. This filing outlined their joint positions on 1, justification of declaring a moratorium, 2, communications and customer engagement during the moratorium, 3, reporting during and after the moratorium, and 4, when to end the moratorium. After receipt and consideration of the joint proposal, as well as submissions from St. Lawrence and Corning Gas, staff issued its staff proposal on February 12, 2021. The staff proposal was designed to serve as a framework for the declaration, operation, and lifting of any moratorium called within the state. The staff proposal recommended that each LDC develop metrics to be used for determining if a moratorium needed to be called, comprehensive communication plans, the development of a consumer bill of rights, a filing to the Commission at least 2 years in advance of of calling any moratorium, and the issuance of requests for proposals for non-pipe alternatives no more than 60 days after the moratorium notice. In addition, the staff proposal called for the official notice of moratorium to be filed with the Commission at least 120 days before the start of the moratorium. This notice would be a substantive and significant filing and would be issued for comment pursuant to the state's Administrative Procedures Act. Once enacted, the staff proposal requires the development and keeping of a waitlist for service, development and deployment of moratorium management services, and no less than semi-annual reporting to the Commission on alternatives offered, waitlist participation, and economic development issues addressed, with programs and ratepayer dollars used to address them. Once an LDC is ready to lift the moratorium, the staff proposal called for development of a plan, including how success would be measured, the use of metrics to show available gas supply and service, and a filing to the Commission at least 2 weeks before the lifting, showing that safe and adequate service can be provided. With these considerations, staff issued its proposal for consideration and comment. Comments were received from a number of entities, all of whom supported the moratorium process in general and provided minor suggestions for changes or additions. Based upon staff's review of these comments, including from the JLDCs, staff proposes that the Commission adopt the staff proposal with a few minor modifications. First, the JLDCs propose a number of indicia to use to determine design day supply-demand imbalances. These proposals included MMBTU per day available for delivery, expected equivalent number of typical new customers, and the estimated years of growth a system could absorb. As for indicia of deficiencies in infrastructure, the criteria proposed included pressures at distribution system lateral endpoints, looking at minimum and average endpoint pressures as a percentage of maximum allowable operating pressures. Staff proposes adoption of these criteria. The remainder of the issues center on customer service and consumer protection and will be addressed by Chelsea Lacatera.
Thank you, Ken. Good morning, or good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. The remaining proposed requirements in the draft order are primarily designed for consumer protection and information. The first includes the express requirement of a moratorium customer bill of rights. While ideas were presented, the draft order would have the Commission expressly require the JLDCs to develop a standard bill of rights that provides, at a minimum, guarantees to customers that the utility will provide information on the moratorium, the timing, the availability of service, information on alternatives, and the process for lifting the moratorium. The Bill of Rights will make clear that there will be no cost to the consumer if the consumer cancels a service request during a moratorium. Third, documents will be translated into different languages as required by the Home Energy Fair Practices Act. Finally, the Bill of Rights will remind customers of their ability to file a complaint against the utility with the Commission. This draft Bill of Rights will be submitted for approval by the Commission within 45 days of this order. In light of the possible impact of a moratorium, both instituting and lifting, on low and moderate income customers and customers in areas classified as disadvantaged communities, the draft order directs a gas utility to report on these communities in terms of population numbers and gas usage, as well as methods for allowing customers to determine the availability of gas and for providing the last 5 years' worth of customer applications, service requests, and work requests. In terms of customer outreach, the draft order would require that within 6 months of this order, each LDC shall provide a draft public communications plan to the Director of the Office of Consumer Services. 45 days thereafter, the draft order provides that each LDC shall file a final version of this comprehensive plan with the Secretary to the Commission and shall update this plan annually. As part of any actual notice of moratorium, the LDC shall provide the communications plan that will be implemented. Finally, the draft order directs the LDCs to include the training materials that will be used for the utility's customer service representatives as part of their communications plan, and to file updates no less than 120 days prior to the start of a moratorium. With those details, staff asks for the Commission to adopt the proposed order. This concludes our presentation, and staff is available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll do comments first and the voting on both items after. So I'll start with 101 and with 102. I appreciate all the work and, appreciative of the time taken to put all this together. I want to thank you all for your efforts in presenting this to us today. We asked 2 years ago, this commission asked 2 years ago that you come forward with a proposal for how we would modernize the gas planning process, and we appreciate what you've delivered on that. When the commission originally asked for this, we asked that you prioritize transparency and have a focus on equity. And it's clear that those things were a key consideration in the plan that you put forward. You've also attempted to maintain consistency with the CLCPA and future expectations of that. And again, very much appreciative of that outcome. I think the key goal in all of this is to ensure that we learn from the lessons of the past, we reduce confusion, and give customers and utilities and everyone involved as much notice as possible in what actions are coming. We don't want to create a situation where we are creating inequities or the appearance of inequities, and I think what you have put forward today definitely keeps that in mind. We also want to make sure we don't incur any costly infrastructure, unnecessarily build out infrastructure that may not be utilized in the future. Again, I think you do a really great job of mapping that out. And then finally, with the moratorium, ultimately, I think you've taken into consideration key factors in past moratoriums, and looking forward, we'll be better positioned to take action as needed, should the need arise. So I want to thank you all for your work in putting these two orders together. And with that, I'll go to Commissioner Berman for any comments.
Thank you so much. I know in the first item today, we had inaugural staffer presenting, and I know, I think both Ken and Chelsea is your first time presenting as well, so welcome, and I'm glad to see everyone doing so well. I really just have a couple of thoughts. As many of you know, I've been pretty loud throughout my time as a commissioner on gas planning and gas moratorium issues since I came on the commission in 2013, and the need for us to really do more and really get under the hood and address the critical issues. So, it's important to me. I do think that our existing planning processes are not adequate and need to be improved. I don't necessarily think that is a reflection of the utilities. Frankly, I think it's a reflection of many factors, and I also don't think it's a reflection of staff. I think that for me, our core component are really our three prongs are the need for us to be focused on reliability, affordability, and safety. And to the extent that we are looking now carefully at long-term planning of the gas system, I think that's appropriate. And so I am glad that we're finally sort of addressing this proceeding. There's two issues here, though, and actually there's two proceedings. There's the case that came in 2012, 12G0297. I want to address that one first because one of the things that is of concern to me is the closure of that. Now, that closure of that is really just a formality because for all intents and purposes, it's been dormant for many years. It does get to the heart of our need to have finality when we have generic proceedings open and then we don't sort of close them down and we leave it sort of hanging out there for folks to not know whether we're going to take them up or not. But also this proceeding, the other one that's connected to this, which was opened in 2020. We just came to it now. And for me, it is something that I've been saying that when we are going to put items back on to hit the refresh button, we do have to give parties an opportunity and notice in some fashion, even though legally we don't have to say, hey, and not just, putting it on the preliminary and then the final agenda, to say, we're about to decide this. Maybe it's just to at least talk about it at session and then make sure that their comments that they may have submitted are still accurate and reflective and update, because there's a lot of things that might be in the record that we're relying on for our decision making, and that does concern me. Closing down the decision or the case that was opened in 2012 is not necessarily a problem. The problem is, and this is where I have a concern with it, is that the rationale for the closure in the order is, I think, not accurate. And the other prong is that we are also asking the utilities to put forward information as to the 100-foot rule on the costs, and I'll explain. In the order, we say that in June 2013, staff released a proposal regarding the 100-foot rule to clarify what facilities new natural gas customers are entitled to pursuant to 16 NYCRR Part 230, and asking LDCs to provide information on aspects of new gas customer attachments. And then in the ensuing months, it became clear that New York would be taking steps to address climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which would not include perpetuating the use of fossil fuels. I just think that categorically that is not accurate, and for two reasons. One, that gets to my earlier comments in the item before, which is that seems to be presuming that we are downsizing the natural gas system, which may or may not be the case, and we need to be looking at that more holistically. But two, a few months after June 2013, we were not at the place of reducing or getting rid of fossil fuels. In fact, as a commission, and I think it's important to sort of point out, we had a whole host of things that we as a commission have been doing since then. Many of New York PSC's rate plans adopted for the major gas utilities in the state have had neighborhood or network expansion programs that require the gas utilities to develop plans for the reasonable economic extension of gas service to underserved applications and communities. The programs were designed to eliminate common barriers to conversion and provide financial support to low-income customers to enable their full participation. The gas utilities were asked to identify areas for expansion and conversion and aggregate rebate programs to encourage more conversions from dirtier fossil fuels to natural gas. It was seen as a positive, and it was done to help reduce emissions and also to help enable low-income customers and also to enable those who didn't have access. For example, in 2016, so 3 years after 2013, the PSC approved upstate, New York State, NYSEG's Community Expansion Pilot Program, under which the company was to test a community expansion approach that provided a fixed surcharge quote for a project. During the development period for prospective projects, NYSEG was to develop a fixed surcharge quote based on a forecast of customers that it anticipated would connect over a 10-year surcharge period for the project. Therefore, potential customers would know the surcharge amount before committing to take natural gas service and would have the option to pay upfront or monthly. Ongoing, we also approved a Community Development Fund pilot program for NYSEG and RG&E to expand natural gas to communities where either no approved gas franchise existed or where there is an existing approved franchise but no gas main. The fund was going to match funding provided by local, regional, and state agencies to offset the capital costs incurred to construct natural gas infrastructure in a community. This was a 2-year pilot program with a fund of $300,000 for NYSEG and RG&E, both with a maximum matching fund contribution of $100,000 per project. Any unspent funds in a given year were to carry forward to the next year throughout the duration of the program. Any funds not spent when the pilot program ended would be returned to customers through a reconciliation mechanism. Then, in December 2016, the PSC approved, as part of a rate plan settlement, an expense allowance of $200,000 for Brooklyn Union Gas, DBA National Grid, to support a customer conversion rebate program. This allowance was to be used, among other things, for gas air conditioning projects and conversions to natural gas that required contribution in aid of construction. Then we also allowed National Grid, KEDLI, the New York PSC, a part of the rate settlement, approved a conversion rebate program providing a $1,000 rebate to new residential customers who wanted to connect to the distribution system along planned main replacement routes. This was focused on those who had significantly higher number of residential customers located near a gas main but were not connected to the system. It was to help those folks who wanted it. And then it goes on. So the reason I'm sharing this is because these were customers who desired it. There was a focus on why this was helpful, not only to those customers, but also helpful in looking at it from rate impacts as well as reducing admissions. And so when we made these decisions and actions, it wasn't just a snapshot in time. It also had some forward-looking projections on what this would mean and would look like. So when we ask now for decisions, for the utilities to put forward costs now, we also have to look back at what it does mean to stop this program. And we have to look at other things, not just, one particular piece, but the benefits that had been there in many of these things that have been stopped. And also some of the information like, there were neighborhood programs, I know, comes to mind, the neighborhood expansion programs that were on Long Island, in Roslyn, thinking of Roslyn, and there's a whole host of communities that were invested in the 100-foot rule because it was helpful to them, and it was helping them get off, for many of those folks, oil or propane. And so it was, something that I think we just need to keep in mind, and that record, by closing it, you're also taking away and not having come back into this record some of those very factual information that could be helpful to have as a historical perspective continuing here in this record, including, I might add, information on what came out of the technical conferences, including the air admission reductions in New York City, including NYSERDA's support at the time for why the 100-foot rule and the gas expansion was really, really important. And so I just point that out because in a vacuum and in trying to now sort of fit the policy that's been changed, it actually misaligns for what had been done and what the rationale was then. Now, it may change, but we should at least understand it and understand why it came into being and what was helpful or not. And then also, it's not a one-size-fits-all in this state. So there may be pockets of areas, whether it's upstate and parts of upstate, and, you know, we may dispute where upstate is, and downstate may be different. So there may be pockets that if we have it, everybody's the same, we may be actually harming folks who need access to gas, and that 100-foot rule is really going to be harmful if we take it away. So I just, you know, I just want to be very careful on that. All right. The other thing is in here is there is a focus on stakeholder engagement, which I think is really great. I think the more we can do on stakeholder engagement, the better. However, I am concerned that we have not carefully thought through what this looks like. We have seen the clunkiness of stakeholder engagement that does not necessarily think through how stakeholder engagement can be effective in a way that is helpful. I want us to make sure that we are providing an environment that is a collaborative environment, that everyone feels they can work together, and it's the right boundaries are there. There are certain technical aspects of the long-term planning that may not be appropriate for anyone but the technical experts to be working on. Just like when we do the emergency response plans or the electric plans and other things, we don't necessarily have everybody and their mother involved in that. And so I just want to make sure that when we are looking at this, that there is a careful evaluation of the scope of what aspects of it may need to be in there. And the order does not necessarily give those boundaries, and I think that that's really something that we should think about. And I don't think it was. I don't think the order prevents the staff from working with the utilities and others to provide more guidance on what the more limited scope might be, or more appropriate scope might be. Also, as to the extent that the draft orders, or the draft order in 101 talks about stakeholders having the ability to ask for information, it also doesn't give any guidance on what that is. Now, nobody would want me to be the one to ask for information, because, as you know, I'd ask for 20 million things, right? So that may not be appropriate. And we may never, as we see from session, we may never get out the door, right? So we may need to have some scope, again, on what appropriate information requests are, just like we do in our natural discovery. And we may need to have an ability to, as appropriate and as reasonable, and work with what that looks like and actually help in shaping what that is. There's also in the order a very prescriptive filing schedule on the order for the utilities. I think that this is a learning process. And to the extent that the utilities will be, and it's a different filing schedule than had been there before, to the extent that the utilities may look at that filing schedule and either find it workable or not for whatever, reason, to the extent that staff and the utilities come up with a different schedule, I personally think that we should allow that flexibility as it makes sense. And we should also think about the need for that change, because it shouldn't be so prescriptive on who goes first or who goes second, if it makes sense to change that order or to change that timeline. That's just my 2 cents. There's also, again, another reference to RNG and hydrogen in there. I do believe that to the extent that we should be leaning in a lot more on our own, rather than, again, referring back to the draft scoping plan and the Climate Action Council. New York is differently situated than other states, and that's, in this case, not necessarily a positive. New York, as to RNG, does seem to do the accounting of it differently, and we may need to, and that may be unfairly unfair in terms of how we're accounting for it from an emissions perspective. I don't know. I do think that we need to be a lot more open to it and a lot more engagement on it from a technical perspective, and also looking at how to rectify some of those criticisms and challenges in a way that gets us more further along in a positive way. I also, because here, like in 201, it talks about the draft scoping plan. I do want to take a moment to recognize that, first of all, I don't think I've ever said how much I appreciate the work that the Climate Action Council and all of the folks who have been put in a lot of time to it that I appreciate that. And I appreciate I've spent a lot of time watching virtually, and it's an enormous task to do. So thank you for your efforts as well. But the one thing that also is confusing to me is there are 3 statements that were made, written statements that were official statements that were made by 3 of the members that I thought were part of the draft scoping plan as part of the vote. Dennis Eisenbeck, and then 2 others. And those 3 statements I thought were really, really helpful substantively. It helped me. It helped me understand some of the issues that were in the draft scoping plan, some of the challenges that had come from listening to the virtual meeting as well. And I couldn't remember all the details of the statements. And then I looked, they're not in the draft scoping plan, they're not part of the appendix, and they're not on the website for the Climate Action Council. They may be embedded somewhere, maybe in the meeting minutes or something, but you can't easily find them. And I think that's a fail. So if someone who happens to be connected to the Climate Action Council could help to put that up on the website, that would be really helpful. So if you could take that back, that would be helpful. Because I do think that is helpful for us as well, because a lot of that relates to some of the technical needs as it relates to us. As to the moratorium 102, I believe strongly that we need to have standards and a process for the moratorium. My concerns are the same that they've been in many others that we have dealt with before. We are not addressing the elephants in the room. We are not addressing that the moratoriums continue to exist. We are not addressing the continued supply constraints. And we seem to not be addressing that we have an obligation, even if it's not directly on our jurisdiction, to work, not just watch, but to work to remedy it and work to not have the moratoriums continue to exist. Having a procedure on how to end the moratorium is not sufficient when we know that we have moratoriums that continue to exist, that have been existing for years. It's like having a proceeding that has been in place since 2012, and we only end it after many years when nobody else cares and it's pretty much dormant. It's unacceptable. If it means that we need to figure it out, we need to figure it out. It's not acceptable. We can't keep saying, well, we've just dealt with this time and again. There's so many different, Lansing is the one I come to. Lansing doesn't make sense. We didn't allow it in National Grid, but now we're setting up a system where we're understanding, we know winter is coming. We're going to have a problem. And what we're doing is we're making it easier, but we're also sending a message. And multiple interveners says we're making it that much easier. And we're basically, in a sense, saying, do it faster and get out ahead and have the moratorium notice. That may be helpful for giving notice, but it still doesn't help in getting the moratoriums to not happen. And we should be getting under the hood more on what those issues are. And that means addressing the elephant in the room and addressing with our sister agency some of those challenges today, not waiting. It's too important, and it's back to what we care about: reliability, affordability, and safety. We have a responsibility to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Alisi, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, my colleagues. I think this proposal recognizes that any moratorium has to be fair and equitable, and with that in mind, I'm pleased to see that there is no attempt at this point, and I stress at this point, to pursue a statewide moratorium on gas. In my view, such an effort would be unfair to those prospective customers that are making plans based on continued availability of natural gas. And as of now, this plan meets the need for a universal system, and I fully support it. And I want to again applaud the staff for the tremendous effort. I know I'm only touching on one aspect of it, but it's one that's important to me, and I stress that. So I'll be voting yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Edwards, do you have any comments?
I have no comments. Want to thank the staff for all of their hard work, especially on the moratorium. Good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Howard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I had mentioned to you personally, I believe this order, while important, may be a bit premature, since we still have 9 days of the legislative session left, where there are a variety of pending pieces of legislation that could have a dramatic impact on this. Particularly, I believe Commissioner Alisi made passing reference to that. Every few months, it seems there is no solid ground under our feet regarding the issue of natural gas and the natural gas system and its impacts on all levels. And I don't know when we're going to get some solid ground. To the extent that this proceeding helps at least provide a roadmap to the extent possible, so we can have some multi-year consciousness going forward about what natural gas is, what it isn't in New York State, who gets it, who doesn't, and the impacts thereof. I have a couple of questions in regard to the impacts that any municipalities actions that may have taken regarding a de facto moratorium through statute of no new natural gas hookups, first for small customers, then potentially large customers. How will we deal with that? And for instance, particularly in New York City, right? We have a hard law that says by a date certain the customers will not get new service. How does that? Can anyone answer a question how that's going to play in to this, our analysis? Because that did not exist when many of these cases were born.
So when you say how will that play into our analysis? Do you mean in the planning process for the utilities that would be affected?
Correct, and particularly as it relates to any potential moratoria that exists. The moratorium becomes, I believe, maybe moot if the government says no more gas. I just want to know if that is staff's conclusion as well.
I know that this has come up in a number of recent rate cases as well, and I think that we've looked at it from a couple different perspectives, recognizing that it will change the trajectory of gas sales and peak demand, but that it is a little uncertain exactly what that impact will be in the next few years anyways, as I'm not an expert on the New York City law, but I believe it does have a number of the exceptions and timeframes in it that mean that certain things might be necessary to get through the next couple of years that before those changes might really take effect. So I think that we have endeavored to look at things and ensure that the gas systems affected are able to meet demand that may occur, but also understanding that there will be impacts going forward.
Thank you. On the issue of accelerated depreciation and stranded costs, can anybody give me what happens to customer bills when we grant accelerated depreciation?
So I think that is the purpose of the studies that are being asked for in the draft order, in order to look at what the potential impacts of different scenarios of accelerating depreciation may have on bills.
Maybe not the specific act, but the theoretical impacts.
I think it's pretty straightforward that if you accelerate depreciation, you're going to increase the depreciation expense at present or in the near future. Though once it is depreciated, there would be less depreciation expense at that later date.
So we could expect near-term rate impacts if, in fact, we grant accelerated depreciation?
Yes.
Thank you. The next question I have is the issue of new large takers. It's well known the state of New York is soliciting a variety of new, very large businesses, particularly those involved in microelectronics and the manufacture of microchips, which are, to use, pardon the phrase, ginormous users of natural gas, not only for their current plants, but with the expansions that we hope to do. I just want to know, will we do some analysis of gas is going away for little people, but big people get to have new gas? And how does that work? And then as a corollary to that is, as the system, we lose customers through electrification, what can we guess is what that impact will be for the remaining customers work supporting the same gas system but with just fewer customers?
I think I could start with the second question first. Laid out in the draft order, the utilities are required to offer or look at various scenarios over time and the associated cost with those scenarios. So that would include declining demand or increasing demand and the different alternatives to the traditional natural gas system.
No, I got that. But just again, back to the theoretical. Is it fair to say, as we have fewer customers supporting a relatively intact system, does that not infer that those remaining customers will have to pay more to support the entire system?
Those costs will be laid out in the long-term plans, and they will be subject to stakeholder comments throughout the process.
I know this, I'm asking for you to have some conclusionary remarks, and I'm not going to hold you to them. I'm still going on the theoretical.
Theoretically,
just your
less
basic
customers, same expenses, yes. It will
Gotcha.
cost more.
So in the near term, depending on how the state of New York decides to go, that there, and I do this in the period of no time in many, many decades have we pointed to energy affordability across the board like we are today, so that these issues that will have potential, maybe very large impacts on the issues of energy affordability. Is that also fair to say without the full impact of the analysis yet?
I mean, I think that that's something that we are looking at and that does need further review. Depending on how the use of the gas system develops over the coming years, you could end up with a lot of interplay between accelerated depreciation on some of the assets. Maybe portions of the gas system would continue to be used for those sectors that can't electrify, but maybe the way that gets done could be done in a way that you don't end up with the cost of the system today being borne by that smaller subset of customers. So I think there's a lot that's just not known yet.
Well, I'm hopeful that this proceeding will lead us to some more solid answers on these subjects. The other thing I want to point out, and it was brought out at several sessions ago, and regarding, we used the issue of large customers get to vote with their feet or their entire factory. So if the issue becomes that we make natural gas not a viable option for many large takers, it would be naive to a fault to believe that economic activity will not use natural gas somewhere else. And as we went through recently, and last week, the state celebrated the groundbreaking for the new Great Lakes cheese facility in Cattaraugus County. However, that was a perfect example that customer, it leaves the system, it was going to take its gas load with it. And it's not like that we weren't going to process cheese without natural gas. It was just whether they were going to do it in New York State or somewhere else. So I think that we need to be cognizant of that, and that this issue, and I will bring it, you've heard it several times already, the issue of economic competitiveness needs to be part of this analysis. If we make natural gas burning, particularly for industrial purposes, not possible, or if we want to develop 18 million square feet of new office space in Midtown Manhattan, how are we going to, what's the plan? We may even have a plan for how the buildings may be built and financed, but we haven't told anybody yet how we're going to heat them. And I think that will need to be part of this analysis as well, is how we fit the issue of electrification and or lack of gas for these very large either industrial facilities and or large real estate developments. So I think that will need, I would suggest that that's a critical component of this undertaking. Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing this. I hope we don't have to revisit this in a couple weeks because the law changed. But until that happens, I will be supporting this.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Berman, I believe you said you had a question?
Yeah, I just have actually a question and a comment. And first of all, thank you, Commissioner Howard, because I think you raised a lot of really good comments and questions. So we're talking about costs here and how this gets borne out. And it really trips into a lot on the 201 item and the gas transition. How much of this is going to get allocated into the CLCPA costs versus the gas planning costs? Because I'd like to see us tracking the gas planning stuff under the CLCPA costs as well, because so much of it is being done in some ways because of that. So I don't want us to somehow be looking at it as, well, it's not really that much because we're doing long-term planning and that's not CLCPA related costs. But it is, because a lot of what they're doing may have to be done because it's being done related to the CLCPA. So I just wonder how we're factoring that in. And will that get tracked in the clearinghouse?
Which costs are you talking about here?
Well, hold on one second. I think that may be a question we'll have to address through the CLCPA, and that those members aren't here right now. So why don't we table that for further discussion? Because I don't think we have the right people to answer that question right now.
All right, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. And then the other issue is, it does remind me that we had last session talked about needing information from Empire State Development on our economic development projects, and as it relates to all of this, it follows up from Commissioner Howard. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
Thank you. I have a few questions, and I think given some of the other comments, I'm going to just change, you don't know this, but I'm going to change the order in which I'm asking them. Let me ask first, I know Jessica Waldorf affirmatively said during her presentation that the CLCPA order was not in conflict with these orders, but let me ask you, do you foresee tensions between these items and specifically 20G 0131, but really both of them? Do you foresee tensions between these items and the CLCPA order we just approved?
I don't. The two orders are well aligned, and we're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions reduction pathway study in the CLCPA order that will help to inform the long-term plans the utilities will be filing under the gas planning process. we do require that the utilities provide the greenhouse gas emissions impacts of their proposals under the gas planning process, so that we will be able to evaluate those and provide that information to the commission.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, in requiring utilities to file plans assuming different scenarios, including a no infrastructure option, as you explained, are we inviting them to game the system and use the multiple scenarios as a way of making the case against a no infrastructure option?
I'll take that one. So that is a good question, and I'll tell you that we believe that including the alternative scenarios, is important to ensuring we maintain the safety and reliability of the system. To Commissioner Berman's comments earlier under the previous items, there's a lot of technical aspects in this planning, and this process lays out an opportunity for stakeholders and everyone as a group to become more educated on the technical aspects of the system and work through the requirements that are needed. I'll point out that yes, there is a requirement that the utilities or LDCs include a no infrastructure option, and it does give them the opportunity to assert that option is not feasible. But I want to note that if an LDC chooses to assert that, we expect staff to select a consultant and all stakeholders to vigorously go through those assertions, and as well as the entirety of the rest of the LDC's long-term plan.
Okay, thank you. I just have one more question, and I feel like, given some of the other comments that have been made today by my colleagues, I just want to just add a little context as to why I'm asking this. Commissioner Berman had referenced the draft scoping plan coming out of the Climate Action Council as referencing the downsizing of the natural gas system. And I do, with that in mind, I do think there's a reasonable inference that the scoping plan is headed in that direction. And so with that in mind, I would ask, why are we allowing for the possibility of the expansion of natural gas customers and natural gas usage? Isn't that in contrast to the CLCPA goals, either as expressed by the law or expressed by the draft scoping plan of the Climate Action Council?
So, Commissioner Majore, I would note that we aren't encouraging the expansion of natural gas customers or natural gas usage, but the order seeks to expand on efforts to date in utility rate cases to minimize and potentially eliminate new gas infrastructure investments and new usage, if possible, and also while maintaining the safe and reliable service that the utilities have been providing to their customers. And right now, it is important to note that there are existing statutory and regulatory requirements that do require that utilities provide service to applicants. There are specific ones in public service law in sections 31 that apply to applications for service from residential customers, and there are also requirements in the Transportation Corporation's law in section 12 of that law that apply to applicants for non-residential service. And with those statutory requirements, the utilities, when they receive a request, as long as they have the gas available to serve them, are required to provide service. And the planning process that we've set forth in the draft order, while encouraging utilities to lower emissions and lower gas usage, it does set forth a process through which we can ensure that the utilities can continue to provide the customers that they do have and the customers that they are required to serve with safe and adequate service.
Okay, thank you. I think that those answers are they satisfy me. I do, and also, I don't want the moment to pass without thanking you for the presentation and commending the staff work on these important items. I do want to note that it is, I think we are doing we are making a good faith effort to, thread the needle, but it is certainly possible. Commissioner Howard alluded to the legislature still in session and the law might change, but I also think that we could foresee the possibility that the scoping plan that comes out of the Climate Action Council could create tensions that might not exist yet. But I just, there's a few different sentences in that draft scoping plan that sort of stand out as potentially being a source of conflict. And I'll just read one. In the vision for 2050, the state will need market solutions to better align with the 100% emission-free requirement, allow for a rapid transition away from fossil fuel generation, and maintain reliability and affordability. So that idea takes into account our mandate to maintain reliability and affordability, but also envisions a transition away from fossil fuel generation, which I think in the context of the rest of the report is, I would read as a transition away from fossil fuel use. So I'm mentioning this now because, as Commissioner Howard said, the legislature is still in session. I think Commissioner Valesky mentioned that the Climate Action Council is still taking input on the scoping plan, and in a sense, this policy that we're voting on today is in fact feedback for the Climate Action Council and the legislature. So I want to thank you for your work on this. I'm very comfortable voting for it, but the ball is in play. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Majori. Okay. With that, I'll bring the two items to vote. I'll start with a vote specific to item 101. My vote is in favor of the recommendations to adopt. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I concur in part and dissent in part.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Edwards, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Valesky, how do
Yes.
you vote? Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Okay. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. All right. I'll go to call for a vote for item 102. My vote is in favor. Commissioner Berman?
I concur in part and dissent in part.
Commissioner Alisi?
Yes and all.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Valesky?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Okay. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay. With that, I hear there's a call for a small recess. Looking at my watch, it is 12:53. Why don't we return at 1:03 and we'll reconvene at that time. Thank you, everyone. I believe we've all returned. All right, so let's begin. Our next item, our fourth item for today, is item 301, case 22-E-0139, related to the report on electric system preparations for the upcoming summer. Today with us presenting will be Richard Quimby, Andrew Timbrook, and Maribel Rivera. In addition, we'll also have Paul Dartmenko, Aaron Odell Keller, available for questions. Richard, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. My name is Richard Quimby. I'm a Power System Operations Specialist 4 in the Electric Safety and Reliability section of the Office of Electric Gas and Water. Today, we will be briefing you on the state's electric transmission and distribution system summer preparedness for 2022. Slide 3, please. Each spring, staff conducts its
Did we?
Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. My name is Richard Quimby. I'm a Power Systems Operations Specialist 4 in the Electric Safety and Reliability section of the Office of Electric Gas and Water. Today, we will be briefing you on the state's electric transmission and distribution system summer preparedness for 2022. Slide 3, please. Each spring, staff conducts its annual review of the electric system and utility preparedness to meet the summer peak operating conditions for New York. This review focuses on electric system reliability and is part of our normal course of business at the department and is a high priority review. Peak summer operating conditions are often when the electric system can be the most stressed, and we looked to each of the utilities and to the NISO for assistance and assurances that we are prepared to meet New York customers' needs for the upcoming session. This review consists of an assessment of the New York ISO projected demand forecast and their supply resource availability. Additionally, staff issues its annual summer preparedness survey to each of the utilities and reviews all responses, as well as conducts interviews with each utility to discuss planned and completed system reinforcements, spare equipment inventories, and confirm that they will reliably meet customer demands for the summer operating period. Through these surveys and interviews, we find that each of the utilities have completed or will complete all major planned reinforcements, inspections, and repairs prior to the start of the summer operating season and have adequate spare equipment on hand to meet unforeseen circumstances or system events. Based on staff's review and assessment of utility data, meetings with each of the individual utilities and the NISO, we find that the state's electric transmission and distribution systems are prepared to meet meet the forecast for 2022 summer electric demands. Next slide, please. Now we take a look at the forecast load compared with supply resources for the upcoming summer. This chart shows the historic actuals and the forecasted statewide peak demand as projected by the New York ISO. The lower brown colored line shows the 2022 peak load forecast over the next 10 years. This summer's peak load forecast is consistent with what we have seen over the past several years. The NISO's baseline forecast projects a statewide peak demand for 2022 of 31,765 megawatts. Looking out over the next 10 years, the peak load forecast remains practically flat. The flattening of the peak load growth rate can be attributed primarily to the positive effects of the state's energy programs and to the underlying forecasted econometric growth rates. It should be noted that embedded in this demand forecast are any anticipated impacts of the ongoing COVID pandemic on electric usage throughout the state. Next slide, please. Corresponding to the previous graph, this chart shows the forecast impacts of the contribution of energy efficiency and distributed generation towards reducing peak demands. The blue bars represent the forecast energy efficiency impacts, and the red bars represent the impacts of distributed generation. By the year 2032, the combined effects of these programs is projected to help lower the peak demand by over 6,400 megawatts. Next slide, please. Here we present the expected available resource capability for 2022. Installed generating capacity for 2022 totals 37,537 megawatts, a decrease of 3,365 megawatts from 2021. The decrease in generating capacity can be primarily attributed to small generator deactivations and deratings of some fossil generators. Combining the installed generation capacity with projected demand response and special case resources, as well as net firm purchase imports, provides New York with a total of 41,049 megawatts worth of capacity resources for 2022. The 378 megawatt increase in net firm purchase imports from 2021 is simply the market's way of economically procuring the necessary capacity needed to reliably serve the forecast peak load in New York. Next slide, please. The New York State Reliability Council has set the 2022-23 installed reserve margin at 19.6% above the forecast peak demand. This 19.6% installed reserve requirement results in a 6,226 minimum requirement above the forecasted peak demand for a total installed capacity requirement of 37,991 megawatts. As mentioned previously, the total available capacity for 2022 is 41,049 megawatts, which is 3,058 megawatts above the minimum required. This equates to actual installed reserves of 29.2% above the forecast peak for 2022, providing further cushion to serve the peak load beyond the 19.6% margin required by the New York State Reliability Council. To further help curb peak energy system demands, each of the utilities have load relief programs in which customers are compensated for providing load reductions when called upon. Currently, there is estimated 1,100 megawatts enrolled in these programs for 2022 to further facilitate peak demand reductions during the summer's hottest days. Additionally, the NYISO and each utility have operating procedures in place to further mitigate any unforeseen reliability issues. These emergency operating procedures include emergency demand response programs, EDRP, voltage reductions, voluntary industrial curtailments, emergency purchases, among others. The NYISO projects that about 3,300 megawatts will be available under emergency operating procedures if needed this summer. This now concludes my portion of the presentation. Given all the information we have presented here, staff believes that the electric system is adequately prepared to reliably meet New York customer needs for the summer of 2022. I'll now turn it over to Andy to discuss the projected summer pricing outlook.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Andrew Timbrook, and I am a Utility Engineering Specialist in the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water's Upstate Rates and Tariffs section. In this portion of the presentation, I will be providing a summary of how the utilities have performed at reducing the electric supply price volatility for their full-service residential customers. I'll provide an overview of the utility's residential electric supply portfolio composition for this coming summer. I'll also compare this summer's energy futures to last summer's futures and actuals, as well as discuss capacity price changes as compared to last year. And finally, I will provide a summary of how market price changes are expected to impact full-service residential customers and compare the overall price change to the last several years. Before I begin, I will reiterate that supply prices are market-driven, and the utilities under Commission jurisdiction have little to no control of the costs of the electricity they supply to their customers. The cost of electricity is determined largely by the energy and capacity markets administered by the New York ISO. However, the utilities do have a large role in mitigating supply price volatility for their mass market customers, which is the subject of my presentation. Next slide, please. Actually, go one more, please. Thank you. This graph shows the result of the utilities' electric supply price volatility mitigation efforts since December of 2008. It compares the average New York ISO market price volatility, the red line, with the volatility of the utilities' residential electric supply portfolios, which is the blue line. Or more simply stated, the lines show what the volatility of the utilities' portfolio would have been had they only purchased from the market versus what it actually was because they engaged in hedges. Each point on the line represents the volatility over a 12-month period as measured by the coefficient of variation. As you can see from the chart, the utilities have continued to do a good job at reducing the portfolio price volatility compared to market. The highest point on the chart represents the volatility that was experienced as a result of the polar vortex in the winter of 2013-14. The following run-up in volatility and drop is the result of a combination of electric market prices steadily falling and a price spike that occurred in February of 2015. This price spike was nowhere near as high as the prior winter, but did cause the volatility to rise. We then experienced a few years of relatively stable prices due to mild weather, followed by another price spike that occurred in January of 2018, again mainly driven by cold weather. The run-up from October of 2019 and subsequent decline in the market price volatility through April of 2021 is the result of energy prices declining, followed by an increase in the statewide full-service residential market price, which was primarily driven by a shift in capacity costs due to the New York ISO peaking on a weekend in the summer of 2019. This weekend peak shifted more capacity cost responsibility to residential customer classes. A price spike also occurred in February of 2021 due to colder than normal weather. And this past winter, as you well know, we experienced a prolonged stretch of cold weather in mid to late January and early February, which significantly impacted market prices and price volatility. You can see the result of this on the very far right of the graph, where the red line goes up from about 18.5% to almost 40%. This increase in market prices, in combination with the way in which Consolidated Edison and Central Hudson bill their full-service residential customers for supply, significantly impacted many full-service residential customers in their service territories. Con Edison has since filed a proposal to modify its full-service mass market supply mechanism, which is also before the Commission today for consideration as item 369 on the consent agenda. Department staff is also in discussions with Central Hudson to determine if its full-service mass market end-use supply rate mechanism can be modified to reduce the likelihood of significant bill impacts due to the operation of the mechanism in the future. Overall, as compared to the market price volatility, the statewide portfolio continues to perform very well. Next slide, please. This chart shows the elements of the composite residential electric supply portfolio for this summer. As shown, about 59% of the portfolio consists of fixed price contracts. Of these, the majority are financial in nature. The fixed portion of the portfolio also includes newer physical contracts, older legacy contracts, and a small amount of the utility's own generation with fixed fuel costs, as well as NYPA contracts. The balance of the portfolio is predominantly made up of market purchases, followed by relatively small amounts of utilities' own generation with variable fuel costs and index contracts that are primarily indexed to natural gas. Next slide. This chart shows this upcoming summer's expected average energy market prices based on ICE futures and how they compared to last summer's futures and actuals for New York City, the Hudson Valley, and Western New York, or New York ISO zones J, G, and A, respectively. Last summer, expected energy market prices that we reported to you in May are in green. Last summer's actual market prices are in blue, and this summer's expected market prices are in red. Last summer, the actual prices ended up between 35 and 45% higher than what we expected going into the summer period. At this point, going into summer 2022, energy prices are expected to be higher still than last year's by between 37 and 42%. This is most likely due to the expectation of higher generator fuel prices driven by current world events, as well as greater economic activity. I will like to note, however, that actual prices will likely vary from futures due to a variety of factors, including weather, economic conditions, and demand on the system. And as I will show later, we are not expecting that the full-service mass market residential customer bills will be impacted to this extent due to the hedges the companies have in place for this summer and to the changes in capacity prices that I will go over next. Next slide. So this next slide shows what last year's summer strip auction capacity prices were and what this upcoming summer's prices are. As you can see, there is projected to be very little change in price, especially in the G through J locality, with slight decreases expected for New York City and the rest of state. The two main factors which drive this slight price decrease are a lower installed reserve margin, slated to drop from 120.7 to 119.6% on a statewide basis, as well as a lower statewide peak forecast, which is dropping from 32,333 megawatts to 31,767 megawatts. These changes should lead to a slightly lower prices in the New York City area and the rest of the state as a result of lowering the UCAP requirement in the New York control area. Next slide. This slide provides a bit of context around the changes in market prices and the resulting impact on the electric supply portion of customer bills. This chart shows an estimate of the supply portion of a typical residential monthly bill as a result of the year-to-year changes in the load-weighted full-service mass market residential commodity. For the chart, we considered a typical residential customer to use 600 kilowatt hours per month, which is close to the statewide average but varies by utility. As you can see, the summer month bill impact for this upcoming summer, cumulatively for June through September, is expected to be about 12% higher than last summer on a statewide average basis. This increase is consistent with increases that have occurred over each of the last 2 summers of approximately 11% per year and would be a return to 2014 price levels after a recent period of low supply prices. I should note that depending on where a customer is located in the state and what utility they're served by and their actual use, their summer commodity bill will vary from what is shown here and could be higher or lower than last summer. To conclude, though summer electric prices have risen in recent years and are projected to continue that rise this summer, the utilities have continued to perform well at reducing the month-to-month price swings compared to the market and have maintained approximately a 59% fixed price hedge level for this summer on a statewide average basis, which should mitigate any significant unexpected price spikes should they occur. Further, we continue to work with the utilities to adjust their full-service mass market customer supply price mechanisms as needed to improve volatility mitigation efforts. That concludes my portion of the presentation. I will now turn it over to Mary Bell to discuss customer outreach and education. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners? Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Christian, Commissioners. My name is Maribel Rivera, and I am a manager in the department's Consumer Outreach and Education and Call Center sections. This past winter, New Yorkers faced dramatically higher energy prices that impacted their utility bills. This situation was particularly difficult on vulnerable customers like the elderly or families with fixed or low incomes. As discussed in the previous slides, the energy prices are likely to remain a concern for the foreseeable future. This report describes the outreach efforts being implemented by department staff and New York State energy utilities to provide customers with information to help them manage their energy usage during the 2022 summer season. Next slide, please. In light of the financial impacts of the current world events, the harsh winter months of 2022, and the forecasted summer commodity prices, it is critical that the department and New York utilities pursue aggressive summer preparedness campaigns and including promoting the following key messages. 1. The anticipated price of energy commodity and how market forces such as supply and demand affect the price of natural gas and electricity. 2. Ways that consumers can manage energy bills, including bill payment programs such as budget billing and deferred payment arrangements, as well as financial assistance programs, such as the 2 home energy assistance programs that are currently open. They are known as Emergency Heat and the Cooling Assistance. 3. Promoting the availability of energy efficiency programs, as well as simple, affordable measures consumers can take to beat the heat and reduce energy use, which may help to control their bills. 4. How consumers can help maintain the reliability of the electric system by reducing consumption during peak usage times and increase understanding of energy alerts and the actions to take if one is declared. And last, 5. Safety information regarding natural gas, electricity, and storm-related service interruptions. Next slide, please. In order to reach utility consumers with these important messages, department staff will conduct the Summer Outreach and Education campaign using a variety of tools. Staff will use a combination of multilingual summer publications, event exhibits and presentations, virtual platforms such as the department's websites and social media platforms, the partnerships with other state agencies and service organizations and local governments. Specifically, we will develop and distribute plain language publications that will highlight our core messages. All summer campaigns publications will be available in English and Spanish, and many are also available in Bengali, Chinese, Haitian Creole, Korean, Russian, and Yiddish. We are also in the process of translating key department publications into Arabic, Italian, and Polish. We distribute these materials through our grassroots outreach, excuse me, including in-person and virtual presentations to community groups and exhibits at public events such as county fairs, senior expos, home shows, and the annual New York State Fair. Participation in these events provide us with an invaluable opportunity for face-to-face interactions with numbers of consumers that allow us to reach large, diverse, and otherwise underserved populations. To further increase our efforts to reach New York State consumers and make our information more accessible to the virtual community, we will have a dedicated page on our Ask PSC website with summer forecast information, digital copies of our publications, links to New York State and utility assistance programs, as well as energy efficiency and summer safety tips. In addition, we will utilize the department's social media channels to promote these messages throughout the summer months. We will post tips and sound bites on these platforms and drive traffic to the Ask PSC summer page. Lastly, we will share the summer campaign materials with our call center representatives to assist them in directing consumers to information about peak demand, consumer assistance program, energy efficiency, and low-cost ways to beat the heat and manage energy bills. Next slide, please. To help us reach as many New Yorkers as possible, we invite our network of nearly 6,000 consumer leaders, including social service agencies, community organizations, libraries, and local government officials to partner with us in educating their constituents about rising energy costs, bill management options, and assistance programs, as well as measures to help them reduce their energy consumption. We will reach out to our partners by email and letter to announce the start of our summer campaign. This communication will direct our partner community leaders to the dedicated Ask PSC summer page, where they will find digital copies of our publications that may be downloaded and shared with their staff and constituents. We will also share a flyer with a QR or a quick read code that directs users to our webpage. That flyer will be posted in high traffic areas. Lastly, the letter will also inform our partners that staff is available to provide presentations to consumer groups, and to ensure that the message is being received, we will track the open rate for our email campaign and conduct follow-up email campaigns throughout the summer season that target the community leaders who may not have opened our previous email. Next slide, please. In addition to initiating our own outreach program, we are working with the utility companies to encourage them to maintain strong customer education programs so that their customers receive the information and assistance they need during the coming summer months. The companies have outreach and education plans to alert customers about anticipated commodity prices, actions they have taken to mitigate price spikes, and ways consumers can conserve energy and manage energy bills. This is through payment plans and financial assistance programs. In response to the supply price volatility of the early months of 2022, the companies increased the frequency of messaging and broadened their outreach efforts and channels to promote awareness of energy price forecasts and the impacts on customers' bills. The companies will continue with this outreach effort in the upcoming summer season. The companies are using a variety of channels to reach their customers, including email campaigns, text alerts, news releases, radio and paid media ads, bill insert and bill envelope messages, postcards, newsletters, on-hold telephone messages, website features, YouTube videos, and social media posting. The companies also work with municipal and elected officials. They partner with human services organizations and community groups and conduct grassroots activities such as virtual and in-person events and forums. Some companies also alert customers about their energy usage and offer tips about energy-saving actions that can help reduce their bills. Lastly, the companies provide training to their customer advocates as well as their call center staff on summer messaging and customer assistance. In conclusion, the Office of Consumer Service is pursuing a summer outreach and education campaign. It's designed to raise awareness of New York's electric supply and demand outlook and price forecasts. The campaign will ensure consumers have access to information about actions and programs that will help them manage their summer energy bills, use less energy, and stay cool. Staff will continue to monitor the need for additional outreach and education efforts during these uncertain times. We will work with the utilities to make modifications as needed throughout the summer season. This concludes my portion of the presentation, and staff is available for questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. It's encouraging to see the preparations that we've taken and the state is prepared to prepare the state for this coming summer cooling season. I'm encouraged by the attention to detail in documenting the generation resources that are available and their availability. It's good to know we have those in play. But I'm further encouraged by your statements, specifically the statements about outreach to an expanded group, community leaders, partnerships, etc. As we learned earlier in the year, it's going to be important to get the messaging out far and wide to ensure that everyone can prepare and take their own measures to address their needs this coming heating season. And with that in mind, I want to point out this month, the Consumer Price Index was released, showing that prices for the month of April were up 8% year over year. This is a record. This hasn't happened in a generation. And when we dig into the Consumer Price Index, which, by the way, for those unaware, the Consumer Price Index is basically a measure of where prices are going in the economy generally. And within that overall measure, there's subcategories for energy, specifically electricity and natural gas. And most interesting to me, according to the CPI, electricity is up 11% year over year, and natural gas 22% year over year. So these are significant increases, and they don't just affect New York, they affect the entire country. And, again, as you mentioned earlier, these are being driven largely by geopolitical events outside our borders. But we are nonetheless dealing with these experiences, and I'm glad to see that we are prepared to help New Yorkers through a variety of ways in dealing with them. So thank you for your presentation today. And with that, Commissioner Berman, do you have any comments?
Thank you so much. I appreciated the presentations from all three of you. I do want to recognize Maribel and Andrew. I think you're both first-timers, so I appreciate that. Though, Maribel, you're a long-time staffer, so I appreciate it. I am concerned about as we head into the summer. I do recognize that, we're hearing that we're prepared to reliably meet the forecasted 2022 summer electric demands. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't come with some challenges and any increases on a hot summer and any emergency issues or any event issues, and weather-related issues can really put challenge, stress to us. And also our emergency responses to that and our demand responses also doesn't necessarily mean that that will not come with its own headaches and cost implications and price spikes for folks. And so I do think that part of our job is to also educate folks on what that means, because we may understand what that means, but as we saw from last time, we had some challenges with that, and I do think that we should be a little bit more direct in that. And we have to be prepared now for this summer season, but we should also be discussing what it means as we head into the winter and the challenges for that. So my own 2 cents is I'm very concerned. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Alisi?
Thank you, Chair. This is a very thorough and enlightening report, result of significant effort, and it's going to be very helpful as we move forward. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Edwards?
Thank you very much. I just have 2 requests. As the events go on across the state, if we could just get posted and keep informed about the date and where it is in case, we are available to attend. And secondly, if we could have a list by region of the service organizations and community-based groups that we have partnerships with. But other than that, thank you very much. Welcome. That's it for me.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Howard?
Thank you. I have one question and then a comment. The issue on the imports issue, where do the majority of our imports come from? Can anybody of the roughly 2,400 megawatts of capacity? Danny, maybe? Sorry.
Yeah, most of them are going to come from PJM, surrounding states.
And how much of that will be from Quebec, would you expect?
I don't know what that number is off the top of my head. I could get back to you on that.
Okay, but it could be significant, correct?
It could be, yes.
Great, thank you. Maribel, I got to tell you have the hardest job in the place. And what you guys had to go through this winter, unfortunately, I believe you're going to pull those heavy load all summer as long. One thing we have not come to grips with as this commission or as a state, despite some recent appropriations on arrears, we have tens of thousands of customers already in arrears based on price spikes, the effect of COVID and the economy. And now we're going into a summer cooling season where we know prices will be higher, but not just prices, as the chairman pointed out, for your electricity bill, but for all your bills. So this already terrible pressure we have on customers who can't pay bills, period. I think we're going to have to continue our dialogue with the utilities, particularly because we cannot, it just would be unconscionable to see mass numbers of shutoffs in this very difficult time. And particularly it'll be at least, in my understanding, until fall before we have a real program on arrears forgiveness from the $250 million that was appropriated by the legislature, which, by the way, was wholly inadequate. But again, I think our already difficult situation will be worse. I just want to make sure, Maribel, that you certainly let the chair and others know when you are resource deprived, meaning, we need to have those people answer those phones and deal with very angry and scared customers. And in terms of your in-person things, I've attended a few things as a private citizen, and this last few months. The longest lines I saw were folks wanting to come and talk, largely complain, to PSC representatives about their issues regarding their bills and the very big spikes. Again, your staff does a great job. They are pleasant and patient and under very, very difficult circumstances. And I just want to hope, Mr. Chairman, that we are resourced enough to deal with what I think is this ongoing tsunami of customers who are unable to pay their bills and are going to need to work out bill payment programs and having access to a variety of government programs for them. But again, thank you for what you do. Again, I couldn't do it. Let's put it that way. And again, to you and all your staff for your patience and kindness. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Valesky.
I don't have any questions, just to certainly thank you for the presentation today, for everyone who participated in assembling this information, and thanks most especially for the outreach efforts that I know have already begun and that are going to continue. They're critically important.
Thank you. And Commissioner Majori?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I don't have additional questions. I do share some of the concerns expressed by Commissioners Berman and Howard, but I don't have any additional comments on top of that. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So, again, thank you for your presentation today. And with that, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment or recuse from voting on any of the items on today's consent agenda? I'll start with Commissioner Berman.
I just have a few. Item 263, which is the utility energy registry. I'm going to be voting no. This was a close call, but I have to, after carefully reviewing the record, I have to vote with the petitioners this was a petition for rehearing, and the draft order was denying the petitions for rehearing filed by the multiple interveners and the joint utilities. My concern here is that the petitioners, the reason I'm going to be voting with them, it was weighing in favor of the protection of customer privacy. And while we're pointing out that we were cognizant of how much of the reported load is made up from one single customer usage, and that, in other words, we were saying that the customer-specific usage is information that only the customer and the utility would have knowledge of, and so we were coming to the conclusion, based on our screening of it all, that we wouldn't have to worry about the privacy issues. And I sort of felt that depending on the particular utility territory, that it might be actually easy to figure out who a large customer would be based on it. And so from my own read on it, I was concerned that it might make sense for us to look at that again. So I was in favor of that. So I'm a no on that. On item 370, this is the electric emergency response plan reviews. Every year, the utilities file their plans December 15th, 2021, and then after it gets SAP'd, staff works with the utilities, and the plans generally get amended based on a collaborative process with staff and the utilities, and then they come before us to approve the plans based on our statutory obligations. Since that statutory change where the commission itself approves the plan, I think it was back in 2013 when the statute was amended, we've never had a utility not agree and work collaboratively with this staff, and we've never had a situation where there hasn't been agreement and an amended ERP put before us for approval. This is the first time where there is a utility, Con Ed, who didn't agree to the amendments with staff. And so here the draft order is recommending approving the amended ERPs by all the other utilities, and for Con Ed, reverting back to what I consider the status quo, which is their current emergency response plan that they currently have in place, which is from August 2021. I feel that, and then saying we're going to give them a few more weeks to negotiate further with staff and then come back to us if they're not able to come to resolution. I feel that's insufficient. They've had enough time. Staff has had enough time to work with them and negotiate, and we should have clear before us the final amended ERP, and I worry about the slippery slope of allowing more time. And so for me, I do not want to have a situation where going forward next year, this becomes more of a creep for other utilities to think that, okay, well, maybe we'll just kind of do the same thing. I worry that it sets us up in a perhaps difficult situation. There may be a legitimate reason for Con Ed to not have agreed, but I'd rather have had some submission by Con Ed on why they didn't agree and put it in to the record that I could look at it. But as it is, I'm not supportive. So I'm going to vote for this item, but I'm just explaining why I have concern with that. And I thought it was enough of one that Con Ed should understand where I'm coming from, and the other utilities should hear that as well. On item 375 and items 375 and 380, which deal with cost allocation, I'm a no on both of those items. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Alisi, any comments?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be supporting the consent calendar with the exception of item 563. I'd like to recuse myself.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
No comments, no questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Commissioner Howard?
Yes, thank you. I have one question on item 370. Kevin, will you be able to answer a quick question?
I will attempt to, sir.
Okay. I understand we have not come to what we believe is a satisfactory conclusion with Con Ed on their ERP as submitted, and that we are defaulting back to their previous year's ERP. That being said, how long are we giving Con Ed before they come up with what we feel is a corrected and satisfactory ERP?
We're going to discuss over the next 2 weeks some follow-up and modifications to the 2021 plan. That 2021 plan that we approved is a good plan. It is very prescriptive and restrictive of their work. We've seen market improvements in their performance since Tropical Storm Isaias. However, 2021, we did, the commission so directed Con Edison on some language as per your abilities in Section 66 of the Public Service Law, and that is a very strong plan, and I'm confident that we will be able to build on that. And if we were to have a storm today, it is a strong plan to still, but yet we still want to move forward with some additional modifications as we worked on with the other utilities.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, I would suggest if our plan does not come to fruition, that this commission, Mr. Chairman, take immediate action, and I would support any one commissioner order that may mandate a response from the company. I want to remind this company that their poor performance in storm response resulted in the largest penalty ever brought by this commission. And their 2021 ERP was a reflection of the problems that we identified and the corrective actions they did in that settlement. Again, I would not want to give this company very long. I think when the broader world finds out that they potentially want to renege or retract on their ERP commitments, I think the response will be profound and not very pleasant. But again, Kevin, if you could please keep myself and my colleagues informed in the next couple weeks as this goes forward, I would greatly appreciate it.
Certainly.
On items 375 and 380, I will be voting no. Largely, I think I've stated a few times already today about my problem with the load share ratio for these climate things, particularly as it relates to transmission projects. I just would like to read from the record on, particularly on item 380, some comments that were brought by petitioners, including one by the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, who states in the record that the CLP, that under the CLCPA are not equal, in that the ratepayer in Buffalo may receive very marginal benefit from the Long Island CLCPA process. However, the overwhelming majority of the project's benefit is felt by those utilizing the power for the project that this project will transmit, and that will be in Long Island and New York City. I would also like to note for the record, it's the first time I have a group of state legislators who tend to agree with me on my position. They are representative of state legislators from the entirety of upstate, from western New York through Rochester, central New York, the Capital Region, and the Hudson Valley, all agree that this is an unfair allocation and an unfair burden to the upstate ratepayers, who I will have to point out again are not causing the lion's share of the climate problem on electricity, since they are largely supplied by zero-emission sources. It is also, I'd like to read in the record a thing from the Association for a Better Long Island, who said the initiative, which is straddle already burdened with high costs. So I will submit that the reason Long Island has very high costs, particularly for utilities, is you overtax them. And it's an issue that is still going on, particularly in Nassau County, with assessments over power plants, some of which don't even exist anymore. And again, in terms of there are things that local governments can do to help ameliorate high energy costs. But I find it very, very enlightening that they referred to this order as an unfunded mandate. And I would remind my friends in the legislature, they are the ones who wrote this law. Again, and I would like to conclude with one aspect that is in the order, referring to the reversal of our 75-25 cost allocation that was going to be for the offshore wind integration, now to a load ratio share. In the order, it says the Commission finds here that all utility customers are equal beneficiaries of the projects to be selected pursuant to transmission need identified in the March 2021 order, because they are intended to roll of the project to distribute zero-emission energy to the rest of the state. I could not disagree more with that statement. Again, I don't believe that is the case. We can say it over and over again, but that I don't believe is the real reality. But with that, thank you, and I conclude. I will support the rest of the consent agenda.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Valesky.
I have no comments on any of the items.
Okay. Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say I'm going to abstain on two items. The one is 20T 0549, and the other is 21E 0634. And if you have that, I'm going to comment on one item, if that's okay.
Please.
Okay. I just would like to explain my vote on item 380. Last month, when we voted on two Tier 4 projects, I expressed concerns about projects that are not part of rate cases being paid for by surcharges on consumers' electric bills. That concern extends to the present vote. The cost of the state's conversion to green energy far exceeds the ability of ratepayers to finance through their electric bills. However, much as was the case last month, the present item is not new. A no vote today would not force the legislature to come up with a different way of financing the wind projects that are a necessary part of New York's clean energy future. Another concern I expressed last month was that features of the two transmission lines benefited some parts of the state at the expense of others. There is no cost-benefit analysis in the record related to the present item. The question today is who benefits from the wind energy projects that are behind today's item. This item is about clean energy, and the beneficiaries are the entire state. That's the reason I'm going to vote yes. That said, in voting yes, I have great sympathy for many of the objections to today's proposals. I'm somewhat surprised that some of the objections came from individuals and institutions that were silent on last month's Tier 4 vote. I'm viewing many of the present objections based on the principle of who benefits from clean energy. I agree with the principle that the beneficiaries of the state achieving its CLCPA goals are the entire state, and not simply regions receiving energy generated by the Long Island wind. And I feel like we just reiterated that principle in the CLCPA order that we voted on earlier today. Voting for this is not voting for voting on this item is not voting for a regionally significant ancillary fund or a jobs project that helps part of the state at the expense of another part of the state, or a health program that doubles as an energy program. This is not to say that there are unenumerated benefits to wind-generated energy flowing from Long Island westward. However, none of those benefits are part of the record. So, to be consistent with my stated rationale from last month, I'm going to vote yes. We would be having an entirely different conversation if this was a new item or a new program. This is not the final component of New York's conversion to green energy. I continue to think that beyond projects that are part of rate cases, the state as a whole has more equitable ways of financing the clean energy conversion than simply adding charges to electric bills. My vote yes today should not be interpreted as a sign that I will automatically vote yes for new projects coming forward. With that said, I am going to vote yes on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And with that, I will do a call for vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I vote yes, except for 263, 375, and 380. I vote no.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi?
Thank you, Chair. I vote yes on the entire consent calendar with the exception of 563. I'd like to recuse myself on that issue.
So noted. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Edwards?
I vote yes on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Howard?
I'll be supporting the consent agenda with the exceptions of item 375 and 380, where I will be a no.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
I vote yes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Majori?
I vote yes with the exception of the two items I earlier identified that I'm going to abstain on.
And Commissioner Majori, can I please confirm that the item numbers are 363 and 377 on which you're abstaining?
Let me just confirm that for you. Apologize for being slow on that. 363 correct. And what was the other item?
377.
377. Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. With the votes in favor, the items are approved and the recommendations adopted. I want to thank everybody for this today, and I'd like to take a moment to extend special thanks to two individuals who have been near and dear with this organization for many, many years, one of whom has since left the agency. But I'd like to call out Bruce Alch, our former deputy director, former director, and Cindy McCarran, deputy director, for their long-serving time here with the department. And I want to thank them for their service. They're both retiring or have retired. We've prepared, excuse me, it's been a long session. We have prepared resolutions in their honor, and they will be filed. But I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge their service and their time with us and give thanks and a round of applause for their time with us. Thank you. Okay. And with that, Madam Secretary, is there anything else?
Mr. Chair? Chair Christian?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to go back. I said something incorrect. I'm not abstaining from 377. The item is 381, not 377.
Okay, we're making a note of that. One moment.
Okay, sorry about that.
So just to confirm for the record, you're abstaining from items 363 and 381.
That's correct, yes.
Okay,
It's been noted.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So that said, Madam Secretary, is there anything else?
There's nothing further.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and we are adjourned. Have a good day.